Welcome. Friends, I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're drifting towards sleep, unwinding after a long day, or simply looking for a quiet companion, you found the right place. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Perhaps you're wrapped in a blanket, sitting by a softly lit window, or resting somewhere under an open sky. Wherever you are, I hope you're warm, comfortable, and ready to wander with me into humanity's earliest encounters with the sacred. Those first moments when shadows began to tell stories, when wonder first flickered in ancient eyes. If you find peace or curiosity in these gentle stories, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it with someone who might need a moment of stillness too. And to those who've already joined along, thank you. In the African savannah, nearly 2 million years ago, a small group of early hominins huddles around humanity's first controlled flame. The fire crackles softly in the gathering dusk, its orange glow pushing back against the encroaching darkness that has ruled this landscape since the world began. Archaeological evidence from sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa reveals these moments with quiet precision. Charred bone fragments, burned plant remains, the careful arrangement of stones that speaks to deliberate tending rather than wild accident. The flames dance upward, each tongue of light reaching into the cooling air with an almost liquid grace. The wood, perhaps acacia branches gathered from the thorny scrubland, releases its stored sunlight in gentle pulses of heat and illumination. Carbon atoms that once drifted through ancient atmospheres, that once formed the heartwood of trees drinking from seasonal rains, now transform into dancing energy before these watching eyes. The chemistry is simple enough: cellulose breaking down, oxygen combining, thermal energy radiating outward in waves that warm skin and kindle something deeper in the neural pathways of observing minds. Around this primal hearth, time seems to slow and deepen. The flames create their own weather system, warm air rising, cooler air rushing in to feed the combustion. Tiny currents that stir dust motes and scattered grass seeds into spiral patterns. The fire breathes like a living thing, inhaling oxygen through its base, exhaling heat and light toward the darkening sky. Modern atmospheric scientists understand this process with mathematical precision, but these early humans experience it as pure mystery, matter becoming energy, solid becoming ethereal, the boundary between thing and process dissolving in the hypnotic flicker. Something unprecedented occurs in the neural pathways of these early human minds. The rhythmic dance of flame triggers what neuroscientists now recognize as humanity's first transcendent experiences, altered brainwave patterns induced by oscillating light. The same phenomena that will later manifest in meditation practices, religious ceremonies, and spiritual traditions across every culture on Earth. Alpha waves synchronize with the flame's flutter. Dopamine pathways activate in response to the fire's unpredictable beauty. The prefrontal cortex, that region responsible for self-awareness and abstract thought, begins to process patterns that exist somewhere between the purely physical and the utterly mysterious. Only took 1 million years to discover that staring into fire could change consciousness itself. The irony settles gently. Humanity's most sophisticated spiritual practices, its elaborate temples and complex theologies, all trace back to this simple act of watching wood become light. The flickering shadows cast by firelight create the first moving pictures, the earliest cinema projected onto rock walls and the interior surfaces of rudimentary shelters. Each flame-cast silhouette tells a story without words, suggests movement and meaning in the interplay of light and darkness. The group settles into comfortable positions around the fire's perimeter. Bodies naturally arrange themselves in a circle, and geometry that maximizes warmth distribution while creating clear sightlines to the central flame. This circular gathering pattern will echo through human history, stone circles, medicine wheels, round tables, amphitheaters, as if something in the fire's radial energy impressed itself onto the architecture of human social organization. The flames reach equally toward all observers, democratic in their illumination, indifferent to hierarchy or individual status. Around this first hearth, the earliest stories begin to take shape. Not yet in words, language as we understand it remains hundreds of thousands of years in the future, but in gestures, in shared glances, in the collective recognition that this dancing light possesses something beyond mere heat and illumination. Hands move in shadow play against the firelight. Eyes track the unpredictable movements of individual flames. Breathing patterns synchronize with the fire's own respiratory rhythm. The flames seem alive, seem to respond to the wind's whispers, seem to reach toward the star-scattered sky with an intentionality that mirrors their own grasping fingers. Modern fire ecology teaches us that flames have indeed shaped consciousness, not just human, but the awareness of entire ecosystems. Prairie grasses that bend toward controlled burns, their seed heads opening in anticipation of fire's arrival. Forest canopies that thin themselves to invite flame's cleansing passage. Certain pine cones that remain sealed for decades, waiting for the precise temperature that signals regeneration time. The way lodgepole pine forests create their own fire weather, their resinous branches forming ladders that carry ground fires into towering crown blazes, then release millions of seeds into the nutrient-rich ash. Perhaps these early humans sensed something science would later confirm: fire as a planetary force of renewal, a phenomenon that bridges the mineral and the biological, the earthbound and the celestial. The same fusion processes that power distant stars here manifest in miniature. Chemical bonds releasing energy that once traveled 93 million miles as sunlight, stored in wood fiber, now returned to the cosmic dance of transformation. The flames shift and settle as the evening deepens. Individual logs collapse into themselves with soft sighs, sending cascades of sparks upward like tiny orange stars returning to their celestial home. The fire creates its own constellation, a temporary arrangement of light points that mirror the permanent fixtures scattered across the darkening sky. These early humans cannot yet name the planets or chart the seasonal movements of star clusters, but they sense connection in the visual rhyme between earthbound flame and celestial fire. The mystery deepens in the cooling ash that accumulates around the fire's base. Paleontologists find evidence of repeated fire-making at these ancient sites, layers upon layers of burned material. Hearths rebuilt in precisely the same locations across generations, but the specific techniques remain tantalizingly elusive. How did they carry flame from place to place across the vast distances of nomadic wandering? What rituals surrounded its daily maintenance? Which members of the group held responsibility for feeding the flames through the vulnerable hours of deep night? The archaeological record offers glimpses, carefully arranged hearthstones worn smooth by repeated heating and cooling. Evidence of communal gathering patterns preserved in the distribution of stone tools and food remains, but the lived experience of those first firekeepers dissolves into time's patient silence. We know they succeeded, generation after generation, in maintaining this fragile gift of controlled combustion. We know fire became central to their daily survival and nightly gathering, but the specific knowledge, the precise techniques, the individual stories of triumph and failure around these earliest hearths all fade into the same darkness that fire was first kindled to illuminate. As the evening progresses, the surrounding darkness seems less absolute. The fire has created humanity's first sacred space, a circle of warmth and light that defines inside from outside, known from unknown, us from the vast mystery that stretches beyond the flame's reach. This demarcation, this first boundary between the illuminated and the hidden, establishes a pattern that will echo through every subsequent human understanding of the sacred, the temple's inner sanctum, the altar's focused light, the meditation cushion's scented stillness, all descend from this original circle of firelight carved from primordial darkness. The shadows cast by dancing light begin their ancient dance on available surfaces, cave walls, the sides of temporary shelters, the curved surfaces of large boulders. These moving silhouettes set in motion a relationship between illumination and imagination that will follow our species across continents and millennia. Shadow and light become the first language of mystery, the first alphabet of wonder. Each flicker suggests movement where none exists, implies presence in absence, transforms the static world into something fluid and alive with possibility. The coals settle deeper into their glowing core as the fire burns toward its nightly conclusion. Individual flames grow shorter, more concentrated, their dance becoming slower and more hypnotic. The heat radiates in steady waves, creating microclimates of warmth that extend just far enough to encompass the gathered group. Beyond this circle of influence, the African night reclaims its ancient sovereignty, the distant calls of hyenas, the rustle of nocturnal foragers, the vast breathing of a continent settling into darkness. The last conscious flames drift upward toward the star-filled sky, carrying with them the transformed essence of earthbound matter. In that moment of connection, fire reaching toward distant suns, terrestrial light aspiring towards celestial permanence, humanity's spiritual journey quietly begins. The recognition dawns, wordless but profound, that the same forces animating these small flames also power the light scattered across the night sky. Fire becomes the first bridge between earth and heaven, the first suggestion that local phenomena participate in cosmic processes, the first hint that human consciousness might somehow connect to patterns larger than individual survival. The embers pulse with their own quiet rhythm, like a planetary heartbeat made visible in miniature, and in this gentle cadence between brightness and dimming, these early humans discover humanity's first meditation, the first practice that quiets the mind while opening it to wonder, the first technique for touching something beyond the immediate demands of daily existence. Deep within the limestone caves of southern France, 40,000 years ago, a lone figure moves through passages that have never known sunlight. The flickering torch in weathered hands casts dancing shadows on walls that stretch back into geological time, surfaces carved by patient water across millennia beyond human counting. At Chauvet Cave, at Lascaux, at dozens of sites scattered across Europe and beyond, Homo sapiens begins humanity's first systematic attempt to capture the invisible world and make it permanent. The cave painter pauses before a smooth expanse of rock, studying the natural contours with eyes trained by countless hours of observation. Modern archaeological analysis reveals the sophisticated planning behind these ancient works, how artists selected specific wall surfaces for their texture and curvature, how they incorporated natural rock formations into their compositions, how they understood that limestone's calcium carbonate surface would bond with their pigments across tens of thousands of years. Only took 30 millennia to realize that the most permanent canvases lay hidden underground, waiting in darkness. The pigments themselves carry stories written in mineral chemistry. Ochre gathered from iron-rich deposits, ground to powder between stones, worn smooth by repeated use. Charcoal harvested from controlled fires. Carbon atoms that once formed living wood now transformed into permanent black. Manganese oxide scraped from cave walls, lending deep purple tones to the emerging images. Each color represents a journey across landscape. Knowledge of where Earth yields its hidden treasures. Understanding of how geological processes concentrate minerals into harvestable deposits. The artist's breath mists in the cave's cool air as work begins. Modern cave climate studies reveal these underground spaces maintain constant temperatures year-round, natural refrigeration that preserves not just the paintings themselves, but the delicate microorganisms that help date and analyze them. The cave becomes a time capsule, sealing moments of human creativity into conditions that slow decay to nearly geological pace. The irony settles gently. Humanity's most ephemeral impulses, the urge to create, to express, to communicate with the invisible, find their most enduring expression in these hidden chambers. The first marks appear on stone, not random scratches, but deliberate lines that follow the wall's natural curves, that use shadow and highlight to suggest dimension where none exists. The artist's hand moves with practiced certainty, guided by neural pathways that modern brain imaging reveals as uniquely human, the integration of visual processing, motor control, and abstract thinking that allows the transformation of three-dimensional observation into two-dimensional representation. No other species demonstrates this particular cognitive leap. This ability to create symbols that refer beyond themselves. Animals emerge from the stone's surface. Not the prey species that dominate archaeological food remains, but the magnificent and dangerous, aurochs with their massive shoulders, cave lions caught mid-leap, herds of horses flowing across curved walls like frozen motion. These creatures appear more frequently in cave art than in the bone refuse of ancient meals, suggesting purposes beyond mere hunting magic. Perhaps these images represent something closer to what modern psychologists recognize as humanity's first attempt to process the numinous, the overwhelming presence of wildness that surrounded and defined early human existence. The painting techniques reveal sophisticated understanding of visual perception. Artists blow pigment through hollow bones to create spray painting effects, achieving gradations of color impossible with solid brushes. They use the cave's natural acoustics, placing images in chambers where hand claps echo with particular resonance, where human voices gain haunting qualities. Sound and vision merge in these spaces, creating multimedia experiences that modern archaeological acoustics can map but not fully reproduce. The caves become theaters of consciousness, spaces designed to alter perception and transport awareness beyond ordinary experience. Handprints appear alongside the animal figures, human palms pressed against stone, outlined in pigment blown from ancient mouths. These stenciled hands span thousands of years, different artists adding their marks to walls already crowded with previous generations' work. Modern hand measurement analysis reveals the participation of children, women, men, individuals with missing fingers or ritual scarification. The caves preserve democracy of expression, spaces where age and status dissolve before the universal human impulse to declare presence, to announce existence, to leave traces that say, "I was here, I witnessed, I participated in the mystery." The mystery deepens in the cave's deepest chambers. Some of the most elaborate paintings lie hundreds of meters from natural entrances, through passages that require crawling, through chambers that flood seasonally. The effort required to transport pigments, torches, and artistic tools to these remote locations suggests purposes beyond casual decoration. These hidden galleries feel more like temples, sanctuaries where the act of creation itself becomes ritual, where the darkness and difficulty of access transform painting into pilgrimage. Recent archaeological work has revealed evidence of musical instruments in painted caves, bone flutes carved with remarkable precision, mammoth ivory whistles that produce haunting tones. The cave's natural resonance suggests these spaces served as humanity's first concert halls, where music and visual art combined to create experiences that transported consciousness beyond the immediate world. The painted animals seem to move in flickering torchlight, animated by shadow and flame into something approaching life. Sound and vision merge in these underground chambers, creating synesthetic experiences that modern neuroscience recognizes as powerful triggers for altered states of consciousness. The torch burns lower as the artist works deeper into the cave's interior. Each painted line requires commitment. No erasure possible on stone. No revision available once pigment bonds with limestone. The permanence demands precision, rewards patience, transforms the act of creation into meditation on impermanence and endurance. These artists work knowing their images may outlast their cultures, their languages, perhaps their species itself. The responsibility weighs in the careful placement of each mark, the measured use of precious pigments, the recognition that they create for audiences not yet born. Modern attempts to recreate cave painting techniques reveal the physical demands of these ancient artists. Hours of work in cramped positions, in inadequate light, breathing air thick with torch smoke and mineral dust. The dedication required suggests these images serve purposes beyond mere artistic expression. They represent humanity's first systematic attempt to communicate with the invisible world, whether understood as spirits, ancestors, the forces that govern animal movements, or simply the ineffable presence that inhabits wild places and wild creatures. The painted caves span continents and millennia, appearing in Africa, Europe, Australia, the Americas. Yet they share remarkable similarities: the focus on large mammals, the use of natural rock contours, the preference for difficult-to-reach locations. This convergent development suggests something universal in human consciousness, some fundamental need to make the invisible visible, to capture the ephemeral in permanent form, to communicate across the boundary between the living and the timeless. As the torch gutters toward extinction, the artist steps back to survey the completed work. Animals flow across the wall's surface, captured in eternal motion, frozen in permanent vitality. The cave's darkness seems less absolute now, populated with presences that exist somewhere between representation and reality. These images will outlast the civilization that creates them, will speak to humans not yet evolved, will continue their silent dialogue with darkness long after the last echo of footsteps fades from these passages. The shadows cast by dying flame dance one last time across painted stone, and in that final flicker, the animals seem to breathe, to move, to acknowledge the hand that granted them this strange immortality. The cave accepts another offering to its vast archive of human wonder, another attempt to bridge the chasm between the seen and unseen worlds. Above the painted caves, beneath skies that have wheeled in patient cycles since Earth's atmosphere first cleared, early humans lift their faces toward the vast dome of night. 45,000 years ago, across the steppes of Central Asia and the river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, Homo sapiens begins to recognize patterns in the celestial dance overhead. Modern archaeoastronomy reveals the sophistication of these earliest observations: bone fragments notched with lunar counts, stone arrangements aligned with stellar risings. The gradual emergence of humanity's first systematic attempt to read the sky's cryptic messages. The night deepens around a group of nomadic hunters gathered on an elevated ridge, their day's travel complete, their temporary shelters arranged to catch the morning sun. Above them, the Milky Way emerges in full glory, that ghostly river of light that modern astronomy knows as the edge-on view of our galaxy's spiral arm. To these ancient observers, the stellar stream suggests something altogether different: a cosmic pathway, a river of souls, a bridge connecting the earthbound world to whatever lies beyond the dome of visible sky. Only took 40,000 years to realize that our galaxy structure creates the most persistent mythological image in human culture, the celestial road that appears in stories from every inhabited continent. The brightest stars capture immediate attention. Sirius blazes blue-white in the southern sky, its intense luminosity marking it as special even to eyes untrained in stellar classification. Modern astrophysics reveals why this star dominates ancient sky lore across cultures, at just 6 light-years distant. Sirius ranks among our nearest stellar neighbors, its binary nature creating the subtle brightness variations that early astronomers interpreted as signs of divine activity. The star's heliacal rising, its first appearance before dawn after a period of invisibility, provides these early sky watchers with their first precise seasonal marker, a cosmic clock more reliable than any earthbound phenomenon. One elder of the group traces constellation patterns with a weathered finger, connecting stellar dots into familiar shapes. The process seems arbitrary to modern eyes, but archaeoastronomers recognize the cognitive sophistication involved, the ability to impose meaningful patterns on random distributions, to create narrative coherence from scattered points of light, to develop shared cultural references that can be transmitted across generations. These earliest star maps exist not on stone or hide, but in the neural pathways of human memory, in the stories that transform meaningless light points into navigational aids and seasonal calendars. The Great Bear wheels slowly around the northern pole star, that fixed point around which the entire sky appears to rotate. To these ancient observers, Polaris represents stability in a world of constant change, the one star that never moves, never sets, never abandons its post at the center of the celestial sphere. Modern astronomy explains this apparent fixity as coincidence. Earth's rotational axis happens to point nearly toward this particular star, an alignment that shifts over millennia as our planet's orientation wobbles through its slow precession cycle. But for early humans navigating by starlight, Polaris becomes the first sacred center, the cosmic axis around which all other movements organize themselves. The moon rises later, its gibbous phase casting pale light across the landscape below. Ancient bone artifacts found across Europe preserve the earliest evidence of lunar observation, notched sticks and marked bones that track the moon's 29.5-day cycle with remarkable precision. These prehistoric calendars reveal humanity's first mathematical insights, the recognition that celestial motions follow predictable patterns. That time itself possesses structure beyond the immediate rhythm of day and night. The lunar month becomes the first unit of extended timekeeping, the foundation for all subsequent human attempts to organize experience into meaningful chronological frameworks. The wandering stars present deeper mysteries. Mars glows red among the fixed stellar background, its position shifting night by night against the unchanging constellation patterns. Venus appears as both evening and morning star, its dual identity not yet recognized as the same celestial body observed at different points in its orbit. These planetary motions challenge the early human understanding of cosmic order, suggesting that some celestial beings possess agency, intention, perhaps even personality. The planets become the first gods in human mythology, the sky wanderers whose unpredictable movements require explanation, propitiation, careful observation. Modern planetary science reveals why these ancient sky watchers found the planets so compelling. Mars's elliptical orbit creates its distinctive looping motion against the stellar background, the retrograde loops that early astronomers interpreted as signs of divine indecision or supernatural intervention. Venus's phases, invisible to naked eye observation, create the brightness variations that ancient cultures attributed to the planet's varying moods or activities. Each planetary mystery that puzzled early observers corresponds to genuine astronomical phenomena that required sophisticated instruments and mathematical models to fully understand. The seasonal stars tell their own stories. Orion dominates winter skies, its distinctive pattern visible from every inhabited continent, leading to remarkably similar mythologies across isolated cultures. The hunter, the warrior, the guardian constellation whose presence signals the cold month's arrival. The Pleiades cluster, that fuzzy star group that modern astronomy resolves into hundreds of young, hot stars surrounded by glowing gas. appears in the folklore of every ancient civilization. These 7 sisters provide early humans with an eye chart for testing visual acuity. The number of individual stars visible in the cluster varies with atmospheric conditions and observers' eyesight, making the Pleiades a natural barometer for both weather prediction and personal health assessment. The mystery deepens in the spaces between visible stars. Ancient sky watchers recognized that certain regions of the night sky contain no bright stars at all, dark patches that modern astronomy knows as molecular clouds. Stellar nurseries where new suns form within dense concentrations of gas and dust. To early observers, these starless voids suggest supernatural significance, cosmic wounds in the sky's bright fabric, perhaps gateways to other worlds or dwelling places of invisible beings. The dark nebulae become as important to ancient astronomy as the bright stars themselves. Negative space that defines and emphasizes the surrounding patterns of light. Meteors streak across the sky with sudden brilliance, their brief flashes interpreted as messages from sky gods or souls of the departed traveling between worlds. Modern meteor science reveals the mundane reality: space debris burning up in Earth's atmosphere. Particles no larger than grains of sand creating spectacular light shows through friction with atmospheric molecules. But for ancient observers, lacking knowledge of atmospheric physics, meteors represent genuine miracles, proof that the sky realm actively communicates with the earthbound world through signs and portents that demand careful interpretation. The aurora appears rarely at these southern latitudes, but when the ghostly curtains of green and purple light do dance across the northern horizon, they create profound impressions on watching humans. These ancient observers cannot know that auroral displays result from solar particles interacting with Earth's magnetic field, that the colors derive from specific atmospheric gases excited to fluorescence by high-energy radiation. Instead, the aurora becomes the sky's most dramatic performance, evidence of supernatural battles, dancing spirits, or cosmic fires that burn beyond the dome of ordinary sky. Eclipse events punctuate the regular celestial rhythm with moments of cosmic drama. Solar eclipses, when the moon's shadow races across Earth's surface at twice the speed of sound, create temporary night in the middle of day, revealing stars normally invisible in daylight, causing birds to roost and flowers to close in confusion. Lunar eclipses transform the familiar silver orb into a blood-red disk, Earth's shadow painted across the lunar surface in colors that suggest fire, violence, supernatural transformation. These astronomical events become humanity's first encounters with cosmic forces powerful enough to alter the fundamental conditions of earthly existence. The regularity underlying celestial chaos slowly reveals itself to patient observers. The same stars return to the same positions after precisely 1 year's passage. The moon's phases repeat their cycle with clockwork precision. Even the wandering planets follow predictable patterns, returning to familiar configurations after extended periods of observation. This recognition that chaos contains hidden order, that apparent randomness masks underlying pattern, represents one of humanity's greatest intellectual leaps. The foundation for all subsequent science, mathematics, and systematic thinking about natural phenomena. The night deepens toward dawn as the ancient sky watchers maintain their vigil. Around them, the vast landscape sleeps under starlight, but overhead, the cosmic dance continues its eternal performance. These early astronomers cannot yet measure stellar distances or calculate planetary orbits, but they sense their participation in something immense, their connection to patterns that dwarf individual human experience. The stars become humanity's first teachers in deep time, the first introduction to scales of existence that extend far beyond the brief flicker of single lifetimes. As the eastern horizon begins its subtle brightening, the brightest stars fade back into the approaching dawn. Venus, the morning star, blazes in the growing light, maintaining its vigil until the sun's arrival makes further stellar observation impossible. The night's lessons settle into memory, adding another layer to the accumulated sky knowledge that will guide navigation. Calendar making and mythological thinking for generations yet to come. The stars retreat into daylight's invisibility, but their patterns remain written in human consciousness. The first library of systematic knowledge, the first evidence that patient observation can reveal hidden structures underlying apparent chaos. The sky becomes humanity's first university, teaching lessons in pattern recognition, temporal thinking, and the recognition that individual human experience participates in cosmic processes of breathtaking scope and mathematical precision. Along the fertile crescents where rivers meet the sea, where seasonal floods deposit rich silt across widening deltas, humanity's relationship with water deepens into something approaching reverence. 7,000 years ago, in the valleys of the Nile, the Euphrates, the Indus, and the Yellow River, agricultural communities developed their first systematic spiritual practices around the life-giving properties of flowing water. Archaeological evidence reveals the sophistication of these early water worship traditions, carefully constructed irrigation channels that double as ceremonial pathways, temple complexes positioned to capture and channel seasonal floods, the gradual emergence of priestly classes whose authority derives from their understanding of hydraulic mysteries. The morning mist rises from the river's surface, each droplet catching and scattering the early sunlight into prismatic displays that ancient eyes interpret as divine communication. Modern atmospheric science explains this phenomenon with precise mathematical models, evaporation rates, humidity gradients, the physics of light, refraction through water molecules suspended in air. But for these early agricultural communities, the daily emergence of luminous fog from dark water represents something far more mysterious, evidence that rivers possess souls, that flowing water serves as a bridge between the earthbound realm and whatever invisible forces govern rainfall, flood, and drought. The river's daily rhythm establishes the first temple's temporal structure. At dawn, when mist transforms flowing water into ethereal light, priests perform ablutions that modern hydrology recognizes as sophisticated water management, the systematic removal of sediment, the testing of flow rates, the careful observation of seasonal variations that will determine the success or failure of agricultural cycles. Only took 5,000 years to realize that the most practical water management and the most profound spiritual practices often amount to precisely the same activities. The sacred and the utilitarian merge in these riverside ceremonies, where reverence for water's life-giving properties translates directly into techniques for maximizing agricultural productivity. Temple architecture reflects this intimate relationship with hydraulic systems. At sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, massive stone circles incorporate sophisticated water management features, carved channels that guide rainfall towards central basins, underground cisterns that store precious moisture through dry seasons, alignment patterns that correspond to seasonal flood cycles rather than astronomical phenomena. These ancient engineers understand that water's behavior follows predictable patterns, that spiritual practices can serve practical purposes, that reverence for natural forces enhances rather than conflicts with technological mastery. The flood seasons bring both terror and celebration. Modern river ecology reveals the complex relationships between seasonal inundation and biological productivity, how flooding deposits nutrient-rich sediments across agricultural fields, how temporary wetlands provide breeding grounds for fish and waterfowl, how the annual rise and fall of water levels creates the environmental conditions that support complex civilizations. Ancient communities experience these benefits firsthand, but they lack the scientific frameworks to explain why rivers behave as they do. Instead, flooding becomes evidence of divine moods, supernatural decisions about human worthiness, cosmic forces that require appeasement through ritual and sacrifice. The priests develop elaborate ceremonial calendars around water's seasonal cycles. Modern archaeological analysis of temple remains reveals sophisticated understanding of local hydrology, the precise timing of snowmelt in distant mountains, the correlation between celestial events and peak flood stages, the recognition that river behavior reflects climatic patterns spanning vast geographical regions. These early hydrologists cannot measure watershed boundaries or calculate discharge rates, but their survival depends on predicting water's behavior with remarkable accuracy. Spiritual practice becomes applied science. Religious observance translates into survival strategy. Sacred pools appear within temple complexes, artificial basins designed to capture and contain portions of the flowing river. These constructed water features serve multiple purposes: ritual purification sites, where community members cleanse themselves before religious ceremonies; practical reservoirs that provide backup water supplies during drought periods; meditation spaces where the gentle sound of flowing water creates acoustic environments conducive to altered states of consciousness. Modern acoustic archaeology reveals the sophisticated design principles involved: pool depths calculated to produce specific resonant frequencies, water flow rates adjusted to mask distracting environmental sounds, positioning that maximizes the therapeutic effects of moving water on human nervous systems. The mystery deepens in underground water sources. Springs emerge from hidden depths, their constant flow suggesting connection to supernatural reservoirs, their mineral content often possessing genuine medicinal properties that ancient communities recognize through trial and observation. Modern hydrogeology explains spring formation through precise mathematical models, groundwater flow patterns, geological permeability, the pressure gradients that drive water from underground aquifers to surface emergence points. But for early spiritual practitioners, springs represent direct communication channels with underworld deities, sacred sites where the boundary between visible and invisible worlds becomes permeable. Ritual bathing evolves into humanity's first systematic purification practices. Archaeological evidence from sites across the ancient world reveals sophisticated bathhouse complexes, stepped pools designed for gradual immersion, separate chambers for different stages of cleansing, elaborate drainage systems that ensure constant water circulation. These early engineers understand that stagnant water breeds disease, that flowing water possesses purifying properties, that the psychological effects of ritual cleansing can promote both individual and community health. The sacred bath becomes a technology for managing both spiritual and physical well-being. Water divination develops as priests attempt to read divine messages in flowing patterns. Modern fluid dynamics reveals the genuine complexity underlying water's behavior: turbulence patterns, eddy formation, the chaotic mathematics that govern how flowing water interacts with obstacles and boundaries. Ancient water readers cannot calculate Reynolds numbers or model laminar flow, but they develop sophisticated observational skills, learning to interpret subtle variations in current patterns. Foam distribution, the sound signatures of water moving over different substrate types. These practical skills, developed through religious practice, translate directly into improved navigation, flood prediction, and site selection for agricultural installations. The rivers themselves become divine beings in early mythological systems. The Nile transforms into a god whose annual flood determines the prosperity of Egyptian civilization. The Ganges acquires sacred status that persists across millennia, its waters believed to possess purifying properties that modern water chemistry partially validates, the bacteriophages and trace minerals that do indeed provide certain antimicrobial effects. Rivers develop personalities in human imagination, moods that correspond to seasonal variations, preferences that must be honored through appropriate offerings and ceremonies. Temple complexes expand to include elaborate water features, artificial streams that carry sacred water through ceremonial chambers, fountains that create the visual and auditory experiences associated with divine presence, reflecting pools that double the apparent height of temple structures while providing practical fire protection. These hydraulic installations represent some of humanity's first large-scale engineering projects, requiring sophisticated understanding of gravity flow, water pressure, and maintenance requirements for systems intended to function across generations. The seasonal festivals develop around water's annual cycle. Spring celebrations mark the return of flowing water after winter's freeze. Summer ceremonies honor the peak growing season when rivers run at their fullest. Autumn rituals prepare for the dormant season when water becomes scarce and precious. These religious calendars reflect practical knowledge accumulated across generations, the optimal timing for planting and harvest, the periods when water quality reaches annual peaks and valleys, the correlation between celestial events and local hydrological patterns. As dawn progresses toward full daylight, the river mist dissipates back into invisible vapor, but its daily message has been received and interpreted by watching priests. The water continues its ancient flow toward distant seas, carrying with it the dissolved minerals and organic materials that will nourish agricultural fields hundreds of miles downstream. The temple community begins its daily routine of water management and spiritual observance, activities that merge seamlessly into a single practice of reverent attention to the forces that make complex civilization possible. The river flows onward, indifferent to human interpretation but intimately connected to human survival. Its seasonal rhythms establishing the temporal framework within which agricultural societies develop their first systematic spiritual practices, their earliest experiments in communal worship, their foundational understanding that natural forces deserve both practical mastery and religious reverence. In the rolling hills of what will someday become the European countryside, 8,000 years ago, a small community gathers around a freshly excavated grave. The deceased lies in careful arrangement, knees drawn toward chest, hands positioned to hold objects that accompanied the journey into whatever realm awaits beyond breathing. Around the burial site, archaeologists will later discover evidence of humanity's first systematic attempts to address the mystery of death, grave goods suggesting continued existence. Burial orientations aligned with celestial phenomena. The gradual development of funeral practices that reveal emerging concepts of an afterlife. The body rests within a stone-lined chamber, surrounded by objects that speak to both practical needs and metaphysical speculation. Flint tools lie within easy reach, their sharp edges still capable of cutting, scraping, hunting in whatever landscape the dead might encounter. Clay vessels contain food offerings, grains, dried meat, fermented beverages, provisions for a journey whose duration and destination remain unknown, but whose necessity seems self-evident to grieving survivors. Modern archaeological analysis reveals the sophistication of these early provisions, the careful selection of foods with extended preservation qualities, the recognition that death might involve travel to places where earthly sustenance proves difficult to obtain. The grave's orientation follows patterns that repeat across thousands of burial sites spanning millennia. The deceased faces east, toward the sunrise, suggesting some connection between death and daily renewal, between individual extinction and cosmic rebirth. Archaeological survey work reveals the consistency of this practice across diverse cultures and geographical regions, evidence that early humans developed similar conclusions about death's relationship to natural cycles. Similar hopes that the forces governing dawn might also govern whatever transformation follows final breath. Only took 6,000 years to realize that nearly every human culture independently discovers the same symbolic connections between death and sunrise, between burial and cosmic rhythm. Personal ornaments accompany the journey into darkness. carved bone pendants, polished stone beads, shells gathered from distant coastlines, objects whose creation required skilled craftsmanship and whose acquisition involved extensive travel or trade networks. These burial goods reveal the emergence of individual identity within early communities, the recognition that each person accumulates unique combinations of experiences, relationships, and possessions that somehow survive bodily death. The decorated objects suggest that whatever continues beyond breathing retains enough personality to require familiar belongings, enough identity to benefit from beautiful things. Modern thanatology recognizes in these ancient burial practices the first evidence of sophisticated psychological processing around death anxiety. The elaborate funeral preparations serve therapeutic functions for surviving community members, ritualized activities that channel grief into constructive action, symbolic frameworks that transform overwhelming loss into manageable spiritual concepts, communal ceremonies that reinforce social bonds during periods of maximum stress. The dead receive careful attention, but the living receive psychological tools for coping with mortality's implications. The burial chamber fills gradually with earth, each shovelful representing both physical interment and metaphysical speculation. The covering process transforms accessible corpse into hidden mystery, visible remains into invisible continuation. Early communities understand that decomposition will eventually return the body to soil, but they also sense that something essential persists beyond biological dissolution. The burial becomes a technology for managing this transition, a method for helping the deceased navigate between visible existence and whatever lies beyond direct observation. Grave markers appear above the burial sites, standing stones, carefully arranged rock circles, earthen mounds that will remain visible across generations. These monuments serve multiple functions: territorial markers that establish community claims to specific landscapes, memorial devices that preserve individual memory within collective consciousness, and navigation aids that help survivors locate burial sites for ongoing commemorative activities. Modern archaeological survey reveals the sophistication of early monument placement, positions selected for maximum visibility, orientations that correspond to significant celestial events, construction techniques designed to withstand centuries of weathering. The mystery deepens in collective burial practices. Some sites contain multiple bodies arranged in complex patterns, family groups interred together, individuals of different ages positioned to suggest continued relationships beyond death. These communal burials imply social concepts that extend beyond individual survival, the recognition that death affects entire kinship networks, that relationships might persist in modified form within whatever realm awaits, that isolated afterlife existence would constitute punishment rather than reward. Community continues beyond breathing, at least in the imagination of those who carefully arrange these group interments. Seasonal burial patterns emerge from archaeological analysis. More elaborate funeral practices occurred during specific times of year, harvest seasons when food surplus allows extended ceremonial activity, winter months when agricultural demands decrease and communities can invest time in ritual observance, astronomical events that provide symbolic frameworks for understanding death's cosmic significance. The timing reveals sophisticated planning, the coordination of funeral practice with seasonal abundance, the recognition that proper death management requires community resources beyond immediate survival needs. Evidence of ritual feasting appears around burial sites, fire hearths, food remains, the detritus of communal meals that accompanied funeral ceremonies. These archaeological traces suggest that early communities understood death as a social event requiring collective response, that individual mortality threatened community stability in ways that demanded active countermeasures. The funeral feast becomes a technology for reaffirming social bonds, redistributing resources, and demonstrating that community life continues despite individual loss. Death creates obligation among survivors, the duty to honor the deceased through proper ceremony, to maintain social relationships that death threatens to dissolve. Burial goods evolve in complexity across generations. Simple food offerings expand to include sophisticated craft objects, evidence of specialized knowledge, items that suggest the deceased possess particular skills or social positions requiring recognition in death. The emergence of differentiated burial practices reveals growing social complexity, the development of leadership roles, craft specializations, accumulated wealth that some individuals control and others do not. Death becomes an occasion for displaying social status, for reinforcing hierarchical relationships, for demonstrating community respect for exceptional individuals. The locations chosen for burial reflect sophisticated landscape knowledge. Cemetery sites occupy elevated ground that remains dry during seasonal floods, positions with good drainage that preserve remains across extended time periods, areas protected from prevailing winds but accessible for ongoing commemorative visits. These practical considerations merge with symbolic preferences, proximity to water sources, visibility from settlement areas, integration with natural features that possess spiritual significance. The dead receive prime real estate, locations that balance preservation requirements with ongoing accessibility for survivor activities. Repeat burials at the same sites create sacred landscapes that accumulate spiritual significance across generations. Modern archaeological investigation reveals the extended use patterns, burial grounds that serve communities for centuries, graveyards that expand methodically across available terrain, cemetery areas that eventually influence settlement location as communities position themselves near ancestral remains. The dead become permanent community members, invisible residents whose continued presence shapes land use decisions and social development patterns. As seasons cycle through their ancient rhythm, burial mounds accumulate across the landscape like permanent markers of temporary lives. Each grave represents individual engagement with mortality's universal challenge, personal response to the mystery that awaits every breathing creature. The funeral practices develop sophistication through repetition, communities learning through experience how to manage death's social disruption, how to transform loss into memory, how to maintain connection with those who no longer participate in daily activity but somehow remain present within community consciousness. The buried remains settle deeper into Earth's embrace, returning gradually to the mineral constituents from which living bodies assembled themselves. But above ground, the memorial practices continue their evolution, developing complexity that will eventually produce humanity's most elaborate spiritual traditions, its most sophisticated attempts to understand individual existence within cosmic context, its most enduring technologies for managing the psychological challenges that consciousness creates when it recognizes its own temporality. Across the windswept plains of Neolithic Europe, 5,000 years ago, massive stones arranged themselves in patterns that modern archaeology recognizes as humanity's first large-scale astronomical computers. At Stonehenge, at Newgrange, at hundreds of megalithic sites scattered from the Orkneys to the Mediterranean. Early communities invest enormous collective effort in creating monuments whose primary function involves tracking celestial cycles with mathematical precision. These stone circles represent more than primitive architecture. They constitute humanity's first systematic attempt to integrate earthbound spiritual practice with cosmic mechanical understanding. The great trilithons rise against the morning sky, each massive stone positioned with tolerances that impress modern surveyors. Archaeological investigation reveals the engineering sophistication required for these monuments, the careful selection of sarsen stones from deposits 20 miles distant, the precise shaping achieved with primitive tools, the coordination of hundreds of workers across construction periods spanning generations. The monument builders understand leverage, friction, load distribution, the practical physics required to move 30-ton stones across difficult terrain, and position them with astronomical accuracy. Only took 3,000 years to realize that humanity's most ambitious early architecture emerged from the marriage of engineering capability with spiritual necessity. The heel stone stands precisely positioned to frame the midsummer sunrise when viewed from the circle's center, its massive bulk creating a window through which the sun's annual maximum northward excursion becomes visible to ceremony participants. Modern astronomical calculation confirms the accuracy of this alignment. The monument builders achieved precision within degrees of arc, demonstrating observational skills developed across generations of patient skywatching. The stone circle transforms abstract astronomical knowledge into concrete architectural experience, allowing communities to participate physically in cosmic cycles that otherwise remain invisible abstractions. Lunar alignments reveal deeper sophistication. The monument's secondary axes correspond to the moon's complex 18-year cycle, tracking the elaborate dance of lunar standstills that early astronomers recognized as fundamental to understanding celestial mechanics. Modern archaeological astronomy reveals how these Neolithic observers solved mathematical problems that challenged contemporary students. The recognition that lunar cycles involve multiple periodicities, the development of prediction methods that account for orbital eccentricities and gravitational perturbations. The stone circles become analog computers, mechanical devices for calculating future celestial events with accuracy that rivals modern ephemeris tables. The construction process itself carries spiritual significance. Communities quarry stones from sacred locations, transport them along routes that acquire ceremonial importance, raise them through collective effort that reinforces social bonds across kinship groups. Modern experimental archaeology reveals the human resources required, hundreds of workers coordinating their efforts, sophisticated knowledge of materials and techniques, leadership structures capable of organizing multi-generational projects. The monument building becomes community ritual, shared activity that transforms practical construction into spiritual exercise, earthbound engineering into cosmic participation. The acoustic properties of stone circles suggest additional purposes beyond astronomical alignment. Sound analysis reveals that many megalithic monuments possess remarkable resonant characteristics, the ability to amplify human voices, to focus sound waves towards specific listening positions, to create echo effects that transform ordinary speech into otherworldly communication. These acoustic features seem deliberately designed, evidence that monument builders understood the psychological effects of enhanced sound, the way altered auditory environments can trigger transcendent experiences, induce trance states, create the sensory conditions associated with direct spiritual encounter. Burial chambers incorporated into megalithic complexes reveal the connection between astronomical knowledge and death concepts. At Newgrange, the passage tomb's entrance aligns precisely with the winter solstice sunrise, allowing solar illumination to penetrate the burial chamber's depths only during the year's darkest period. This architectural arrangement suggests sophisticated symbolic thinking, the association between seasonal death and rebirth, the recognition that cosmic cycles provide frameworks for understanding individual mortality, the hope that whatever governs stellar renewal might also govern human continuation beyond bodily death. The mathematical sophistication hidden within stone circle geometry impresses modern analysts. Monument builders employ sophisticated understanding of megalithic units, standardized measurements that appear across sites separated by hundreds of miles, evidence of shared knowledge systems that transcend local communities. These ancient engineers understand pi relationships, Pythagorean triangles, the geometric principles required to create circular structures with astronomical accuracy. The monuments preserve mathematical knowledge in stone, creating permanent archives of numerical relationships that communities can reference across generations. Modern attempts to reconstruct megalithic construction techniques reveal the technological challenges these ancient builders successfully overcame. Moving multi-ton stones requires sophisticated understanding of leverage, rollers, ramps, the coordination of human effort with mechanical advantage. Positioning stones with astronomical precision demands surveying skills, measurement techniques, the ability to translate observational astronomy into physical construction. These practical capabilities suggest educational systems, knowledge transmission methods, social structures that support specialized technical training across extended time periods. The mystery deepens in the monument's extended use patterns. Archaeological evidence reveals that many stone circles remained active ceremonial sites for millennia after their initial construction, suggesting that succeeding communities understood and maintained the original astronomical functions. This continuity of use implies sophisticated educational traditions, methods for preserving technical knowledge across cultural transitions, social institutions dedicated to maintaining astronomical expertise. The monuments serve not only as cosmic computers, but as permanent universities, stone libraries where mathematical and observational knowledge accumulates across generations. Seasonal ceremonies develop around the monument's astronomical alignments. Modern archaeological investigation reveals evidence of structured activities, fire hearths positioned for optimal viewing of celestial events, pathways designed to guide processional movement, artifact distributions that suggest repeated ritual gatherings. These ceremonial patterns transform abstract astronomical knowledge into communal spiritual experience, allowing entire communities to participate in cosmic cycles, to witness firsthand the mathematical precision underlying natural phenomena, to experience visceral connection between earthbound existence and celestial mechanics. The monument's landscape integration reflects sophisticated territorial thinking. Stone circles occupy positions of maximum visibility, locations that command views across extensive geographical areas, sites that establish symbolic claims to entire watersheds or tribal territories. The massive investment in permanent architecture represents more than astronomical interest. These monuments constitute statements of community permanence, demonstrations of technological capability, territorial markers that will endure across political transitions and cultural changes. Trade goods discovered at megalithic sites reveal the extensive networks required to support monument construction. Exotic materials appear from distant regions, amber from northern coastlines, metals from specialized mining areas, pottery styles that suggest cultural exchange across vast distances. These archaeological traces indicate that monument building required resources beyond local availability, coordination between communities separated by hundreds of miles, economic systems capable of supporting large-scale construction projects across extended time periods. As centuries accumulate around the ancient stones, the monuments acquire additional layers of meaning while maintaining their original astronomical functions. Later communities add burial sites, expand ceremonial areas, modify alignments to accommodate changing cultural needs. The stone circles become palimpsests, architectural documents that preserve multiple generations of spiritual and technical development, permanent records of humanity's evolving relationship with cosmic forces that govern seasonal cycles. Agricultural productivity. The fundamental temporal patterns that structure earthbound existence. The great stones stand patient in their eternal vigil, marking sunrise and moonset with mechanical precision, serving as bridges between human consciousness and the vast mathematical harmonies that organize celestial motion. They represent humanity's first successful attempt to create architecture that functions simultaneously as spiritual space and scientific instrument. Earthbound construction that participates directly in cosmic processes. Permanent monuments to the recognition that careful observation of natural patterns reveals underlying order of breathtaking sophistication and beauty. In the dense rainforests of the Amazon basin, 25,000 years ago, A lone figure moves through green twilight beneath canopies so thick that direct sunlight rarely reaches the forest floor. The shaman carries knowledge passed down through generations of plant teachers, the understanding that certain roots, leaves, and fungi possess the power to dissolve the boundaries between ordinary consciousness and the vast invisible realms that surround but rarely intersect with daily awareness. Modern ethnobotanical research reveals the sophistication of these ancient pharmacological practices. The precise knowledge of plant chemistry that indigenous communities developed through millennia of careful experimentation with nature's psychoactive compounds. The ayahuasca vine spirals around an ancient cecropia tree, its thick stem scarred by careful harvesting techniques that ensure the plant's continued vitality. Contemporary pharmaceutical analysis reveals the remarkable chemistry underlying this sacred preparation. The combination of DMT-containing chacruna leaves with monoamine oxidase inhibitors from the ayahuasca vine, a sophisticated understanding of neurotransmitter pathways that modern science has only recently begun to comprehend. The indigenous brewmasters possess knowledge that rivals contemporary pharmacology, understanding gained through direct experimentation across thousands of generations. Plant wisdom accumulated through careful attention to subtle variations in preparation, dosage, and individual response patterns. The preparation rituals extend across multiple days. The shaman follows dietary restrictions that modern research confirms as neurochemically significant, the avoidance of tyramine-rich foods that could interact dangerously with MAO inhibitors. The consumption of specific plant preparations that enhance or modulate the primary compound's effects. Only took 500 years for Western science to understand what indigenous plant teachers mastered millennia ago. The recognition that consciousness-altering compounds require careful preparation, precise dosing, structured ceremonial contexts that maximize therapeutic benefits while minimizing psychological risks. The ceremonial space occupies a forest clearing where moonlight filters through the canopy overhead. Modern acoustic ecology reveals why shamanic communities choose such locations. The forest's natural sound dampening creates ideal conditions for introspective experience. While the elevated canopy provides protection from weather without complete sensory isolation, the jungle becomes a natural temple, its living architecture perfectly designed for the delicate work of consciousness expansion. Its organic acoustics superior to any human-constructed ceremonial space. Participants gather in careful arrangement around the central fire, their positions determined by complex social and spiritual considerations that anthropological research has only begun to decode. The ceremony structure reflects sophisticated understanding of group psychology, the recognition that individual consciousness expansion occurs most safely within supportive community contexts. That experience guides must remain available throughout the journey's duration. That collective ritual provides anchoring frameworks that help participants integrate extraordinary experiences into ordinary awareness. The plant medicine begins its work as neural pathways reorganize under the influence of precisely calibrated chemical interactions. Modern neuroscience reveals the remarkable sophistication of traditional dosing practices, the careful titration that achieves profound consciousness alteration without overwhelming psychological defenses. The understanding that individual response varies according to factors that Western medicine has only recently begun to quantify. The shamanic tradition preserves pharmacological knowledge that required thousands of years to accumulate. Therapeutic techniques that integrate botanical chemistry with psychological understanding in ways that contemporary medicine struggles to replicate. The visionary experience unfolds according to patterns that appear remarkably consistent across cultures and continents. Participants report encounters with plant spirits, animal guides, deceased relatives, archetypal figures that seem to possess independent existence beyond individual imagination. Modern consciousness research suggests these experiences reflect the activation of specific neural networks, the temporary dissolution of default mode network activity that normally maintains the sense of separate selfhood. The plant teachers provide access to mental territories that exist within human neurology but remain inaccessible under ordinary circumstances. The healing aspects of shamanic practice integrate botanical medicine with sophisticated psychological techniques. Traditional healers understand that consciousness expansion often triggers the release of suppressed emotional material. That therapeutic breakthrough requires careful attention to trauma integration. That individual healing cannot occur in isolation from community support systems. Modern psychedelic therapy recognizes these indigenous insights as fundamental to successful treatment outcomes, acknowledging that ancient healing traditions understood therapeutic principles that Western medicine dismissed for centuries. The mystery deepens in the precise botanical knowledge that shamanic traditions preserve. Indigenous communities identify thousands of psychoactive plants, understand their specific effects, know which combinations produce desired therapeutic outcomes and which create dangerous interactions. This pharmacological expertise represents one of humanity's most sophisticated scientific achievements, systematic knowledge accumulated through direct experimentation, careful observation of cause and effect relationships, the development of preparation techniques that optimize therapeutic benefits while minimizing harmful side effects. Different plant teachers provide access to different territories of consciousness. Psilocybin mushrooms create experiences characterized by visual complexity and emotional introspection. Mescaline-containing cacti generate encounters with geometric patterns and cosmic awareness. Cannabis produces states of enhanced pattern recognition and sensory appreciation. Each plant ally possesses its own personality, its own specific gifts, its own requirements for respectful approach and ceremonial preparation. The diversity of psychoactive compounds reflects the sophistication of plant chemistry, the evolutionary development of molecules that interact precisely with mammalian neurotransmitter systems. The integration period following ceremonial plant work requires as much skill as the visionary experience itself. Traditional shamanic practice includes elaborate protocols for helping participants process extraordinary experiences, integrate new perspectives into daily life, maintain connection to insights gained during altered states. Modern therapeutic research confirms the critical importance of integration work. The recognition that consciousness expansion without proper follow-up often fails to produce lasting beneficial change. That extraordinary experiences require structured support to translate into practical life improvements. The ecological context of plant medicine work cannot be separated from its spiritual dimensions. Shamanic traditions understand that psychoactive plants exist within complex relationships with their forest ecosystems, that sustainable harvesting practices must respect the needs of plant communities, that healing humans cannot be divorced from healing the broader environmental contexts that support all life. The medicine plants teach ecological wisdom alongside personal healing, consciousness expansion that includes recognition of humanity's interdependence with the natural systems that provide both physical and spiritual sustenance. The ancestral lineages of plant knowledge stretch back through countless generations of indigenous practitioners. Each shamanic tradition preserves unique understandings, specific techniques, specialized relationships with particular plant allies. This accumulated wisdom represents one of humanity's most valuable knowledge systems, therapeutic expertise that required millennia to develop, pharmacological understanding that cannot be quickly recreated through laboratory research, healing traditions that integrate botanical science with sophisticated psychological and spiritual practice. Modern pharmaceutical research increasingly recognizes the sophistication of traditional plant medicine knowledge. Indigenous communities identified and developed therapeutic applications for compounds that contemporary science struggles to understand, created preparation techniques that optimize bioavailability and minimize side effects, established ceremonial contexts that enhance therapeutic outcomes while maintaining psychological safety. The plant teachers offer lessons in pharmacology, psychology, ecology, and spirituality that academic institutions are only beginning to appreciate and study. As dawn filters through the forest canopy, ceremony participants begin their gradual return to ordinary consciousness. The plant medicine's effects slowly subside, but the insights gained during the visionary journey continue their integration process. The jungle resumes its daily rhythm around the ceremonial clearing, but something fundamental has shifted in the participants' relationship to the forest, to themselves, to the vast mystery of consciousness that the plant teachers have temporarily revealed. The sacred plants continue their patient growth in forest depths, their psychoactive compounds developing through complex biochemical processes that serve purposes beyond human awareness. They represent nature's sophisticated pharmacology, evolutionary chemistry that produces molecules capable of profound interaction with consciousness itself, botanical teachers that offer humanity access to territories of awareness that cannot be reached through ordinary means, across the vast steppes of Bronze Age Eurasia. 4,000 years ago, scattered communities lift their eyes towards skies that darken with approaching storm systems. Thunder rolls across the landscape like the footsteps of invisible giants, while lightning illuminates the grasslands in sudden, brilliant flashes that reveal the awesome power of atmospheric forces beyond human control. These early pastoral societies, lacking scientific understanding of meteorological processes, develop elaborate mythological frameworks to explain the terrifying beauty of weather phenomena that seem to demonstrate direct divine intervention in earthbound affairs. The storm builds gradually above the horizon, its towering cumulonimbus clouds reaching heights that modern meteorology measures in miles, but ancient observers interpret as evidence of supernatural architecture. Contemporary atmospheric science reveals the remarkable physics underlying thunderstorm development, the complex interactions between temperature gradients, humidity levels, and wind patterns that create the conditions for violent convective activity. But for early humans watching walls of darkness advance across familiar landscapes, storms represent nothing less than battles between cosmic forces, divine conflicts that spill over into the human world with consequences that demand careful interpretation and appropriate response. The first lightning strike illuminates the entire landscape in stark, momentary detail. Modern high-speed photography reveals lightning's intricate structure, the stepped leaders that probe downward from cloud formations, the return strokes that complete the electrical circuit with Earth, the plasma channels that reach temperatures hotter than the sun's surface. To ancient observers, lightning represents direct divine communication, messages from sky gods written in fire, supernatural weapons deployed in cosmic conflicts, evidence of supernatural beings whose power dwarfs human capability. Only took 2,000 years to realize that nearly every human culture independently develops thunder gods, divine beings whose personalities reflect the awesome unpredictability of atmospheric electrical phenomena. The thunder follows moments later, sound waves propagating across the landscape at precisely measured intervals that allow careful observers to estimate lightning's distance through techniques that modern physics confirms as acoustically accurate. But early communities understand these rolling sound waves as divine voices, supernatural speech in languages that require priestly interpretation. The rumbling crescendos become cosmic conversations, dialogues between invisible powers whose decisions will determine rainfall patterns, agricultural productivity, the fundamental environmental conditions that govern human survival and prosperity. Rain begins as scattered drops that modern atmospheric science understands as the condensation of water vapor around microscopic nuclei, dust particles, pollen grains, salt crystals carried aloft by convective currents. But for agricultural communities whose entire existence depends on seasonal precipitation, rain represents direct divine intervention in human affairs. Each drop carries supernatural significance, evidence of sky gods' moods, cosmic decisions about human worthiness for continued life and prosperity. The falling water becomes a liquid blessing or liquid curse, depending on its timing, intensity, and duration. The wind patterns shift with the storm's approach, creating pressure changes that modern meteorology tracks through sophisticated measurement systems, but that early humans experience as supernatural presence. Barometric pressure drops trigger physiological responses, headaches, joint pain. The atmospheric sensitivity that many people still report before major weather events. Ancient communities interpret these physical symptoms as spiritual warnings, evidence that supernatural forces directly affect human bodies, that individual well-being connects intimately to cosmic atmospheric processes. Thunder god mythologies develop across isolated cultures with remarkable consistency. In Norse tradition, Thor wields his hammer against frost giants, the crashes of celestial combat echoing across Midgard as thunder. Greek Zeus hurls lightning bolts from Mount Olympus, his divine anger manifesting as atmospheric violence. Hindu Indra battles demons with thunderbolt weapons, his victories ensuring monsoon rains that sustain agricultural civilization. These mythological systems reflect sophisticated pattern recognition, the understanding that storm systems follow seasonal cycles, that atmospheric violence often precedes beneficial rainfall, that weather phenomena demonstrate power scales that transcend human agency. The mystery deepens in storm prediction practices that ancient communities develop through careful observation. Traditional weather forecasters learned to read atmospheric signs, cloud formations, wind direction changes, animal behavior patterns that correlate with approaching storm systems. Modern meteorology confirms the accuracy of many traditional forecasting techniques. Recognizing that indigenous weather knowledge often incorporates observational skills that technological forecasting systems struggle to replicate, the thunder god mythologies preserve practical meteorological knowledge within supernatural frameworks that make weather predictions socially acceptable and culturally sustainable. Ritual responses to storm threats reveal sophisticated understanding of psychological management during weather emergencies. Traditional communities develop elaborate ceremonies designed to influence divine weather decisions, sacrifice offerings, ritual performances, communal prayers that modern psychology recognizes as effective techniques for managing anxiety during uncontrollable events. The storm rituals serve dual purposes: practical preparation for severe weather impacts and collective psychological support during periods of environmental stress. The thunder gods become supernatural allies whose favor can be cultivated through appropriate ceremonial behavior. Lightning strike locations acquire sacred significance that reflects genuine understanding of electrical phenomena. Communities recognize that lightning preferentially strikes elevated objects, hilltops, tall trees, metal implements, developing avoidance behaviors that modern electrical safety confirms as scientifically sound, but these practical safety measures merge with spiritual interpretations. Lightning-struck trees become sacred objects. Hilltop lightning strikes transform elevated landscapes into holy sites. Metal objects touched by divine fire acquire supernatural properties. The thunder gods leave physical evidence of their terrestrial visits, material proof of supernatural intervention in earthbound affairs. The storm's peak intensity creates sensory experiences that push human perception beyond ordinary boundaries. Wind speeds reach velocities that generate infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below human hearing thresholds that nonetheless trigger neurological responses, including anxiety, unease, the sense of supernatural presence. Modern acoustic research reveals how severe weather produces sound frequencies that directly affect human consciousness, creating the psychological conditions that ancient communities interpret as direct divine encounter. The thunder gods speak in wavelengths that bypass rational cognition, communicating through physiological channels that register supernatural presence as visceral experience. Hail adds another dimension to storm mythology. Frozen precipitation that seems to violate natural seasonal patterns by bringing winter conditions during summer months. Ancient communities interpret hail as evidence of supernatural conflict, ice weapons hurled by battling deities, frozen tears from grieving sky gods, crystallized anger that takes physical form and damages earthbound crops and structures. Modern atmospheric science explains hail formation through precise thermodynamic models, but for agricultural communities, hailstorms represent direct divine attack on human prosperity, cosmic punishment that requires immediate ritual response. The storm's gradual dissipation creates atmospheric conditions that ancient observers interpret as evidence of divine victory. Cosmic resolution, the restoration of supernatural order after periods of celestial conflict. Modern meteorology understands storm decay through energy dissipation models, pressure equalization processes, the thermodynamic principles that govern convective system life cycles. But for early communities, clearing skies represent divine favor restored, cosmic anger appeased, the return of supernatural conditions that support rather than threaten human activities. Post-storm environments reveal landscape changes that seem to demonstrate divine intervention in terrestrial affairs. Flash floods carve new channels. Lightning strikes create glass formations in sand. Wind damage rearranges familiar landmarks in ways that require new navigation techniques. These environmental transformations become evidence of supernatural power, proof that thunder gods possess ability to reshape physical reality according to divine will. The storms leave signatures written in altered landscapes, permanent reminders of atmospheric forces that transcend human agency. As afternoon light returns to storm-cleared skies, early communities begin the practical work of assessing damage, repairing structures, replanting crops destroyed by divine weather. But the meteorological drama has reinforced fundamental spiritual understanding, the recognition that human existence depends on forces beyond human control. That survival requires appropriate relationship with supernatural powers. That atmospheric phenomena provide direct evidence of divine involvement in earthbound affairs. The thunder gods retreat into clear skies, but their potential presence continues to influence human behavior through seasonal cycles, weather prediction practices, the ritual frameworks that communities develop for managing relationship with atmospheric forces that demonstrate power scales beyond human comprehension. Weather becomes theology. Meteorology transforms into mythology, and storm systems provide humanity with its most visceral encounters with cosmic forces that govern the environmental conditions supporting complex civilization. In the ancient forests of northern Europe, 6,000 years ago, Celtic communities move through woodlands that seem alive with invisible presence. Every oak harbors spirits. Every grove contains sacred power. Every forest clearing serves as a natural temple where the boundary between visible and invisible worlds grows thin. Modern forest ecology reveals the sophisticated biological relationships that early tree worshippers intuited through careful observation, the mycorrhizal networks connecting forest communities, the chemical communication systems that link individual trees into collective organisms, the recognition that forests function as unified ecosystems whose complexity rivals human social organization. The sacred grove occupies a natural amphitheater where ancient oaks have grown for centuries, their massive trunks creating cathedral spaces beneath interlocking canopies. Archaeological investigation reveals the evidence of long-term ceremonial use, fire hearths positioned for optimal ritual lighting, carved symbols on bark surfaces that track seasonal celebrations, offering deposits that accumulate across generations of forest worship. These woodland temples represent humanity's recognition that forests possess qualities transcending mere biological function, that tree communities demonstrate organizational principles worthy of spiritual reverence and careful study. The Druids approach the grove at dawn, their footsteps silent on forest floors, carpeted with centuries of accumulated leaf litter. Modern soil science reveals the remarkable fertility of forest floors, the complex decomposition cycles that transform fallen leaves into nutrients, the bacterial and fungal communities that process organic matter, the intricate chemical exchanges between living roots and decaying biomass. But for early forest dwellers, the rich soil represents evidence of tree spirit's generosity, supernatural gift-giving that transforms death into life, decay into renewal, the visible demonstration of forest wisdom that human communities can observe and emulate. Individual trees acquire personalities within Celtic spiritual practice. The oak becomes associated with strength and endurance, its slow growth and extreme longevity making it suitable for representing permanent cosmic forces. The ash connects to communication and travel, its straight-grained wood providing material for spears and walking sticks. The hazel offers wisdom and divination, its nuts providing both physical sustenance and symbolic frameworks for understanding hidden knowledge. These tree personalities reflect sophisticated botanical observation, the recognition that different species possess distinct characteristics, growth patterns, and practical applications that make them suitable for specific spiritual and practical purposes. Modern dendrochronology reveals the remarkable information storage capacity of tree ring patterns. Individual trees preserve climate records spanning centuries, drought patterns, fire histories, the environmental fluctuations that shaped forest community development across extended time periods. Ancient tree worshippers cannot read these biological archives with scientific precision, but they recognize that old trees possess knowledge, that forest elders contain memory. That patient observation of tree behavior provides insights into natural patterns that extend far beyond individual human lifespans. The forest's seasonal cycles establish the temporal framework for Celtic spiritual practice. Spring emergence of new leaves creates ceremonies celebrating renewal and growth. Summer's peak photosynthesis period provides occasions for honoring the sun-tree relationship, the recognition that forest productivity depends on solar energy, capture, and conversion. Autumn leaf fall generates rituals around death and transformation. The understanding that forest communities practice sustainable cycling of resources through controlled decomposition processes. Winter dormancy periods create opportunities for meditation on patience, endurance, the forest wisdom that recognizes appropriate timing for activity and rest. The mystery deepens in forest acoustic phenomena that ancient communities interpret as evidence of tree consciousness. Modern forest acoustics reveals the complex sound environments that tree communities create, wind patterns modified by canopy structure, resonance chambers formed by hollow trunks, the filtering effects that transform ordinary sounds into ethereal forest music. Celtic listeners interpret these acoustic experiences as tree voices, forest conversations, evidence that woodland communities possess communication systems that human observers can learn to understand and eventually participate in. Medicinal plant knowledge develops through forest-based spiritual practice. Traditional healers understand that specific plants grow in association with particular tree species, that forest diversity creates microenvironments supporting specialized botanical communities, that tree-plant relationships provide frameworks for understanding therapeutic applications. Modern ethnobotanical research confirms the sophistication of traditional forest medicine, the recognition that plant communities function as integrated pharmaceutical systems, that tree-associated herbs often possess synergistic effects, that forest ecology provides organizational principles for understanding botanical therapeutics. The sacred groves serve as libraries for preserving botanical knowledge across generations. Elder druids teach younger practitioners to identify medicinal plants, understand seasonal harvesting timing, recognize sustainable gathering practices that maintain forest health while providing human therapeutic resources. These forest universities operate without written texts, preserving complex information systems within human memory supported by direct forest observation. The trees become teaching aids, permanent landmarks that help organize and recall botanical information too complex for simple memorization. Forest mythology develops around actual ecological relationships that ancient communities observe but cannot scientifically explain. The world tree concept appears across northern European cultures, the cosmic axis that connects underworld, earth, and heaven, reflecting sophisticated recognition of forest vertical organization. The understanding that tree communities create stratified habitats from soil level to canopy heights. Modern forest ecology confirms these intuitive insights. Forests do indeed function as three-dimensional ecosystems, with distinct biological communities occupying different vertical zones, each level supporting specialized organisms adapted to specific light, humidity, and nutrient conditions. The partnership between trees and fungi provides ancient observers with evidence of invisible forest relationships that seem supernatural but reflect genuine biological cooperation. Mycorrhizal associations allow trees to share nutrients across forest communities, creating resource distribution networks that support collective survival during stress periods. Celtic communities interpret these mutual aid relationships as evidence of forest consciousness, proof that tree communities demonstrate cooperative principles that human societies can observe and emulate. The invisible fungal networks become forest internet systems, communication pathways that connect individual trees into unified woodland organisms. Tree divination practices reflect careful observation of forest response patterns. Traditional practitioners learned to read forest signs, unusual growth patterns, animal behavior changes, seasonal timing variations that correlate with broader environmental trends. Modern forest ecology confirms that trees respond sensitively to environmental changes, drought stress, pollution impacts, climate fluctuations that register in growth patterns. Leaf chemistry, reproductive timing. The ancient tree readers developed genuine scientific skills disguised as spiritual practice, ecological knowledge systems that provide practical information about environmental conditions affecting human communities. The forest clearing serves as ceremonial space where tree worship integrates with astronomical observation. Ancient Celtic communities positioned stone circles within forest environments, creating monuments that honor both earthbound tree wisdom and celestial mechanical precision. The combination reflects sophisticated understanding of natural systems, the recognition that forest communities and cosmic cycles operate according to similar principles, that seasonal tree behavior follows astronomical timing, that both domains demonstrate mathematical relationships underlying apparent natural chaos. Sacred tree species face protection through spiritual practice that serves genuine conservation purposes. Celtic communities designate specific groves as untouchable, establish harvesting restrictions that maintain forest health, develop management practices that balance human needs with woodland ecosystem requirements. These conservation ethics emerge from spiritual recognition of tree consciousness, but they function as effective forest management systems that modern ecology recognizes as scientifically sound. The spiritual framework creates social institutions capable of protecting forest resources across extended time periods. Forest pilgrimage routes connect sacred groves across extensive geographical regions, creating transportation networks that facilitate both spiritual practice and practical trade. Ancient communities develop path systems that minimize forest disruption while providing access to dispersed sacred sites. Recognition that forest travel requires specialized knowledge of seasonal conditions. Wildlife behavior. The navigation techniques necessary for safe woodland passage. The pilgrimage routes become forest highways, transportation infrastructure that serves both spiritual and economic purposes while maintaining ecological integrity. As seasons cycle through their ancient rhythm, the sacred groves accumulate layers of ceremonial significance while maintaining their original biological functions. Individual trees grow larger and more venerable, their extended lifespans creating continuity between human generations, permanent landmarks that preserve cultural memory within forest landscapes. The woodland temples demonstrate that spiritual practice can enhance rather than conflict with ecological health. That reverence for natural systems creates human behaviors that support rather than degrade forest community well-being. The ancient trees continue their patient growth toward forest canopies, their massive trunks storing carbon, processing atmospheric gases, creating the oxygen-rich environments that support complex terrestrial life. They represent nature's architectural achievements, living monuments that demonstrate biological engineering principles beyond human technological capability. Forest cathedrals that inspire spiritual reverence while performing ecological functions essential to planetary atmospheric balance. Across the frozen tundra of Ice Age Europe, 30,000 years ago, a hunting party prepares for the sacred pursuit that will sustain their community through the harsh winter months ahead. The mammoth tracks disappear into morning mist, but the hunters carry more than spears and flint points. They bear elaborate spiritual preparations that transform the taking of life into ceremonial communion with the animal spirits that govern survival in this harsh northern landscape. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dolny Vestornice reveals the sophisticated ritual frameworks that early hunting communities developed around the killing of animals, practices that recognize the profound spiritual implications of ending life to sustain life. The lead hunter pauses at the edge of the mammoth trail, offering prayers to animal spirits whose favor must be earned before the hunt can proceed. Modern wildlife biology reveals the remarkable accuracy of traditional hunting knowledge, the understanding of animal behavior patterns, migration timing, the seasonal variations that determine optimal hunting strategies. But for these Ice Age communities, successful hunting requires more than technical skill. It demands appropriate spiritual relationship with the animal beings whose sacrifice enables human survival. Only took 20,000 years to realize that nearly every hunting culture independently develops elaborate ceremonial frameworks around the taking of animal life. Recognition that killing for survival carries profound ethical and spiritual responsibilities. The mammoth approaches through swirling snow, its massive bulk moving with surprising grace across the frozen landscape. Contemporary paleozoology reveals these creatures' remarkable intelligence, complex social structures, extended parental care, mourning behaviors when community members die. Ancient hunters observed these same qualities firsthand, recognizing that mammoths possess consciousness, social bonds, individual personalities that make their killing something far more significant than simple resource acquisition. The mammoth becomes a person rather than an object, a being whose death requires careful spiritual negotiation rather than mere technical execution. The hunting weapons carry blessing ceremonies that acknowledge the spiritual dimensions of their intended use. Spear points receive individual names, personality characteristics, ritual preparations that recognize these tools as active participants in the sacred drama of survival. Archaeological analysis reveals the remarkable craftsmanship of Paleolithic hunting implements, stone points shaped with precision that modern flint knappers struggle to replicate, hafting techniques that maximize weapon efficiency while minimizing material waste. The weapons represent more than hunting technology. They constitute ritual objects whose spiritual preparation proves as important as their mechanical effectiveness. The kill occurs swiftly, but its immediate aftermath involves elaborate ceremonial activities that recognize the mammoth's sacrifice and ensure appropriate spiritual relationship with its departing spirit. The hunters approach the fallen animal with reverence, offering thanks for its gift of life, requesting forgiveness for the necessity of its death. performing ritual acknowledgements that honor the mammoth's contribution to human survival. Modern anthropological research reveals similar practices across hunting cultures worldwide, evidence that the taking of animal life universally triggers human recognition of ethical complexity requiring ceremonial resolution. The butchering process involves spiritual protocols that ensure respectful treatment of the mammoth's remains. Every portion of the animal receives ceremonial attention, bones positioned according to ritual requirements, organs processed with appropriate prayers, hide preparation that acknowledges the animal's continued spiritual presence within its physical remains. Archaeological investigation reveals that Paleolithic hunting communities utilized virtually every portion of large game animals, waste patterns that suggest both practical efficiency and spiritual obligation. The mammoth's body becomes sacred material whose every component serves human survival while maintaining spiritual connection to the animal's essence. The sharing of meat follows elaborate social protocols that reflect the communal significance of successful hunting. Distribution patterns ensure that every community member receives appropriate portions, with special considerations for elders, children, individuals whose specialized skills contribute to group survival. Modern nutritional analysis reveals the remarkable dietary value of Ice Age hunting, the complete protein profiles, essential fatty acids, vitamin complexes that support human health in harsh northern environments. But the food distribution also serves spiritual purposes, creating community bonds through shared participation in the mammoth's sacrificial gift. The mammoth bones receive ceremonial treatment that recognizes their continued spiritual significance. Skulls are positioned to face specific directions, tusks arranged according to ritual requirements. Bones selected for tool manufacture receive blessing ceremonies that acknowledge their transformation from sacred remains into practical implements. Archaeological sites reveal elaborate bone arrangements, evidence of funeral practices for animal remains, recognition that mammoths deserve respectful treatment even after death. The bones become permanent reminders of successful spiritual negotiation with animal spirits, material proof of appropriate ceremonial relationship with the beings that sustain human survival. The mystery deepens in cave painting representations of hunting scenes that seem to serve spiritual purposes beyond simple artistic expression. Images of mammoths, bison, reindeer appear in contexts suggesting ritual preparation for future hunts, spiritual communication with animal spirits, ceremonial frameworks for processing the ethical complexity of survival through killing. Modern archaeological interpretation recognizes these paintings as evidence of sophisticated spiritual practice, attempts to maintain appropriate relationship with animal spirits. Visual prayers that ensure continued hunting success. Artistic frameworks for understanding human dependence on animal sacrifice. Hunting magic develops elaborate techniques for influencing animal behavior through spiritual practice. Traditional hunters understand that animals possess sensitivity to human intentions. That spiritual preparation affects hunting success through mechanisms that modern psychology might explain as confidence enhancement and improved observational skills. But for ancient hunting communities, the relationship between ceremonial preparation and practical outcomes demonstrates direct spiritual causation, evidence that animal spirits respond to appropriate ritual behavior. That hunting success depends on maintaining correct spiritual relationship with the beings whose lives sustain human survival. The seasonal patterns of animal migration provide frameworks for understanding cosmic cycles that govern life and death relationships. Hunters recognize that animals follow predictable movement patterns, seasonal timing that correlates with astronomical events, environmental changes that create optimal hunting opportunities. These migration cycles become evidence of supernatural order, cosmic timing that governs the availability of animal spirits for human survival needs. divine scheduling that ensures hunting opportunities occur when human communities most need supplemental food resources. Animal spirit guides emerge from hunting practice as supernatural allies that provide guidance, protection, enhanced hunting ability for individuals who maintain appropriate ceremonial relationships. Modern depth psychology recognizes these spirit guides as psychological projection processes, the externalization of hunting intuition, enhanced observational skills, the confidence that emerges from sophisticated knowledge of animal behavior. But for traditional hunting communities, spirit guides represent genuine supernatural relationships, evidence that individual humans can develop personal connections with the animal spirits that govern hunting success and survival. The hunting territories acquire sacred significance that reflects both practical resource management and spiritual relationship with the land. Communities establish territorial boundaries based on animal migration patterns, seasonal resource availability, the carrying capacity that determines sustainable hunting levels. These territories become sacred landscapes, regions where specific animal spirits maintain residence, where hunting rights depend on maintaining appropriate ceremonial relationship with the supernatural forces that govern animal populations. Hunting seasons follow astronomical timing that integrates practical resource management with spiritual observance. Communities restrict hunting activity during animal reproductive periods, recognize seasonal variations in meat quality, coordinate hunting schedules with community food storage capabilities. But these practical considerations merge with spiritual timing, recognition that animal spirits require rest periods. Ceremonial seasons when hunting becomes spiritually inappropriate, cosmic timing that governs the availability of animal beings for human survival needs. As winter deepens around the successful hunting community, the mammoth's meat provides sustenance while its spiritual presence continues through ceremonial remembrance, ritual acknowledgement of the sacrifice that enables human survival. The animal spirits maintain their watchful presence, evaluating human behavior for evidence of appropriate gratitude, respectful treatment of animal remains, continued recognition of the ethical complexity involved in survival through the taking of other lives. The hunting traditions establish patterns that will persist across millennia, recognition that human survival depends on animal sacrifice, spiritual frameworks for processing the ethical implications of killing for sustenance, ceremonial practices that maintain appropriate relationship between predator and prey species. The mammoth spirits continue their invisible supervision of human hunting practice, ensuring that survival remains connected to spiritual responsibility, that the taking of life continues to require ceremonial acknowledgement of its profound ethical and spiritual significance. In the mist-shrouded hills of ancient Scotland, 5,000 years ago, a tribal elder breathes her final breath, surrounded by descendants whose grief mingles with profound spiritual anticipation. The dying woman's eyes focus on something beyond the stone walls of her dwelling, her weathered hands reaching toward invisible presences that seem to gather around her sleeping fur. Modern thanatology recognizes these deathbed phenomena as common neurological events, the brain chemistry changes that often accompany dying, the sensory alterations that can create vivid experiences of deceased relatives and supernatural beings. But for early Celtic communities, such deathbed visions provide direct evidence that ancestor spirits actively participate in the transition between earthbound existence and whatever realm awaits beyond breathing. The preparation rituals begin immediately upon death, as community members position the body according to ancient protocols that ensure safe passage to the ancestral realm. The deceased lies facing east toward the sunrise, her hands positioned to hold the carved bone amulets that will provide protection during the spirit's dangerous journey through invisible territories populated by hostile supernatural entities. Archaeological investigation reveals the sophistication of these early burial practices. the consistent orientations that suggest shared beliefs about post-mortem geography, the grave goods that indicate complex understanding of afterlife requirements, the evidence of communal activities that transform individual death into collective spiritual experience. The vigil extends across 3 nights, during which community members maintain constant presence with the deceased while her spirit gradually separates from physical remains. Modern medical science understands post-mortem cellular decomposition through precise biochemical models, but ancient Celtic communities interpret the body's gradual cooling as evidence of spiritual departure, the slow withdrawal of invisible essence that animated flesh during earthbound existence. The vigil provides time for this spiritual transition, ensuring that the ancestor's essence completes its separation before burial activities begin. Only took 3,000 years to realize that nearly every human culture independently develops elaborate protocols for managing the period between death and disposal. Recognition that spiritual transition requires extended time and careful ceremonial attention. The mourning activities serve both psychological and spiritual purposes, providing surviving community members with structured methods for processing grief while ensuring appropriate honor for the departing ancestor spirit. Traditional keening songs preserve the deceased's genealogy. Accomplishments: personal characteristics that will maintain her identity within ancestral memory. These vocal lamentations create acoustic environments that modern psychoacoustics recognizes as conducive to altered states of consciousness, repetitive melodic patterns that induce trance states, communal singing that synchronizes brainwave activity, sound frequencies that trigger the neurological conditions associated with transcendent experience. The ancestor's personal possessions receive careful ceremonial attention that reflects beliefs about spiritual continuity beyond physical death. Tools, weapons, jewelry, clothing, each item undergoes ritual evaluation to determine whether it should accompany the deceased or remain with living community members. Modern archaeological analysis reveals consistent patterns in grave goods distribution, evidence that ancient communities understood death as transition rather than termination. That ancestral spirits required familiar objects during post-mortem existence. That material possessions maintained spiritual significance beyond their owners' earthbound lifespans. The burial location receives selection based on landscape features that facilitate communication between the living and ancestral spirits. Elevated sites provide visibility for ongoing commemorative activities while positioning the deceased closer to sky realms where ancestor spirits maintain residence. Proximity to water sources ensures spiritual purification, while southern exposure maximizes solar illumination that ancient communities associate with spiritual energy. These burial site characteristics reflect sophisticated understanding of environmental psychology, the recognition that memorial landscapes affect mourning processes, that physical settings influence spiritual experience. That ancestor veneration requires appropriate architectural and geographical frameworks. The grave construction involves architectural elements that serve as permanent communication interfaces between earthbound community and ancestral realm. Stone circles mark burial boundaries while providing focal points for commemorative ceremonies. Raised earthworks create elevated platforms that emphasize the deceased's continued presence within community consciousness. Carefully positioned entrance features allow surviving relatives to approach the gravesite while maintaining appropriate spiritual protocols for interacting with ancestor spirits. These burial monuments represent humanity's first experiments in death architecture, permanent structures designed to facilitate ongoing relationship between the living and the dead. The mystery deepens in archaeological evidence of grave reopening, the careful excavation of previously buried remains for purposes that seem to involve ongoing interaction with ancestral spirits. Bone fragments appear to have been removed and redistributed. Skull elements show evidence of ritual handling. Skeletal remains demonstrate post-burial modification that suggests active ancestor veneration practices. These archaeological traces indicate that ancient communities understood death as beginning rather than ending spiritual relationship. That ancestral remains maintained active presence within community spiritual life. That burial represented temporary interment rather than permanent disposal. Seasonal commemoration develops around the anniversary dates of ancestor deaths, creating annual opportunities for renewed spiritual communication with deceased community members. Archaeological evidence reveals repeated activity at burial sites, evidence of ceremonial fires, food offerings, artifact deposits that accumulate across multiple years of memorial practice. These seasonal observances suggest that ancestral spirits maintain active involvement in community affairs, that deceased relatives continue to influence earthbound events, that death creates spiritual relationships requiring ongoing maintenance through appropriate ceremonial behavior. The ancestral realm acquires detailed geography through accumulated spiritual experience across generations of death and dying. Community members report similar deathbed visions, near-death experiences that suggest consistent afterlife landscapes, encounters with deceased relatives that provide information about post-mortem conditions. This accumulated visionary knowledge creates shared maps of invisible territories, spiritual guidebooks that help dying community members navigate the transition from earthbound existence to ancestral realm residence. Supernatural geography that informs funeral practices and commemorative rituals. Ancestor consultation develops as specialized spiritual practice, with certain community members acquiring reputation for successful communication with deceased relatives. These ancestral mediums develop techniques for entering altered states of consciousness that facilitate spirit contact, fasting practices, sensory deprivation, herbal preparations that create the neurological conditions associated with visionary experience. Modern consciousness research recognizes these traditional techniques as effective methods for accessing non-ordinary states of awareness, psychological territories where communication with internalized ancestor figures becomes possible through neurological processes that feel like genuine supernatural contact. The wisdom of the ancestors accumulates within community memory as spiritual archive that preserves practical knowledge, ethical teachings, cultural traditions that deceased relatives developed during their earthbound existence. Living community members consult ancestral spirits for guidance about difficult decisions. Healing information. Prediction of future events that require supernatural insight. This ancestor consultation serves as cultural memory system, method for preserving and accessing accumulated community knowledge through spiritual frameworks that make ancient wisdom emotionally compelling and socially authoritative. Ancestor protection emerges as fundamental spiritual concept. The understanding that deceased relatives maintain active concern for living descendants' welfare and prosperity. Ancestral spirits provide warning about dangers, guidance through difficult situations, supernatural assistance during crises that exceed ordinary human capabilities. This protective relationship creates reciprocal obligations. Living community members must honor ancestor spirits through appropriate ceremonial behavior, while deceased relatives must continue providing supernatural support for earthbound descendants' survival and success. The ancestral lineages extend through multiple generations, creating extended spiritual families that include both living and deceased community members. Genealogical knowledge preserves the names, relationships, accomplishments of ancestors spanning centuries of community history. These lineage systems serve both practical and spiritual purposes: inheritance frameworks that determine resource distribution rights, kinship networks that define social obligations, spiritual hierarchies that organize supernatural relationships according to ancestral seniority and accumulated posthumous wisdom. As generations accumulate around the ancient burial grounds, the ancestral presence becomes increasingly complex and powerful. Individual graves merge into extended cemeteries. Isolated spirits join collective ancestral communities. Scattered burial sites develop into sacred landscapes where the boundary between living and dead communities becomes increasingly permeable. The ancestors maintain their patient supervision of earthbound affairs, ensuring that community traditions continue, that cultural knowledge persists, that living descendants maintain appropriate spiritual relationship with the deceased relatives who continue their invisible participation in community life across the generations. The ancestral voices whisper through evening winds that move across ancient burial mounds, carrying messages from invisible speakers to listening descendants who maintain the ceremonial frameworks necessary for ongoing spiritual communication. Death becomes gateway rather than terminus. Burial marks beginning rather than ending of expanded spiritual relationship, and the ancestors settle into their eternal role as invisible community members whose continued presence shapes earthbound affairs through supernatural influence that spans the generations. High in the Himalayan peaks, where oxygen grows thin and the boundary between earth and sky dissolves into crystalline clarity, ancient communities discover that elevation itself possesses transformative spiritual properties. 7,000 years ago, across mountain ranges that span continents, the Alps, the Andes, the peaks of Central Asia, human groups developed sophisticated understanding of altitude's effects on consciousness, recognizing that ascent toward mountain summits provides access to spiritual territories unavailable at sea level. Modern high-altitude physiology reveals the neurological basis for these ancient insights: the oxygen deprivation that triggers altered brain chemistry, the atmospheric pressure changes that affect human consciousness in ways that early mountain dwellers interpreted as direct divine contact. The sacred peak rises above surrounding landscape like a natural temple, its snow-covered summit gleaming in morning sunlight that seems more intense at these rarefied elevations. Archaeological investigation reveals evidence of repeated ceremonial activity at extreme altitudes, stone altars positioned near mountain peaks, offering deposits that demonstrate the enormous effort required to carry ritual materials through difficult terrain to locations where breathing becomes laborious and weather conditions threaten survival. These high-altitude sacred sites represent humanity's recognition that mountain summits provide access to divine realms. That spiritual transcendence requires physical ascent through increasingly challenging environmental conditions. The climb begins in pre-dawn darkness, as pilgrims follow ancient pathways carved into rock faces by generations of spiritual seekers. Modern mountaineering science reveals the physiological challenges of high-altitude ascent, the cardiovascular stress, the acclimatization requirements. The risk factors that make mountain climbing inherently dangerous for humans evolved at sea level. But for ancient mountain cultures, these physical challenges constitute spiritual testing, divine trials that determine worthiness for access to elevated sacred territories. Only took 4,000 years to realize that nearly every mountain culture independently develops similar concepts of summit ascent as spiritual pilgrimage. Recognition that altitude provides natural frameworks for understanding transcendence through difficulty and endurance. The atmospheric conditions change dramatically with elevation gain. Air pressure drops to levels that affect human consciousness through mechanisms that modern medicine understands as altitude sickness, the cerebral edema, the altered brain chemistry that can produce euphoria, disorientation, vivid hallucinations that ancient mountain dwellers interpret as direct encounters with mountain spirits. The thin air becomes sacred atmosphere, divine breath that carries messages from sky realms to human consciousness prepared through physical ordeal and spiritual dedication. Each step higher transforms ordinary awareness into increasingly transcendent experience. The weather patterns of high mountains create environmental conditions that seem supernatural to observers accustomed to lowland stability. Sudden storms emerge from clear skies, Temperature variations swing between extremes within hours. Wind speeds reach velocities that seem to demonstrate divine anger or supernatural testing. Modern meteorology explains mountain weather through complex atmospheric models, orographic lifting, adiabatic cooling, the thermal dynamics that create the violent weather systems characteristic of high-altitude environments. But for ancient mountain pilgrims, these weather phenomena represent direct divine communication, mountain spirit voices that speak through wind, snow, and sudden atmospheric violence. The sacred sites positioned near mountain summits serve as natural temples where earth meets sky in configurations that maximize spiritual experience. Stone circles align with astronomical phenomena visible only at high altitudes. Altar constructions take advantage of mountain acoustics that amplify human voices while creating echo effects that seem supernatural. Ceremonial spaces position participants to experience sunrise and sunset events that appear dramatically different at elevation. These mountain temples represent sophisticated integration of geographical knowledge with spiritual architecture, sacred spaces that utilize natural environmental features to enhance transcendent experience. The visual perspectives available from mountain peaks provide spiritual experiences that ancient communities interpret as divine vision. Supernatural sight that reveals landscape patterns invisible from ground level. Modern geography explains these elevated viewpoints through topographical analysis, the sightlines that extend for hundreds of miles, the landscape relationships that become apparent only from high vantage points, the geographical knowledge that elevation provides for navigation and territorial understanding. But for mountain cultures, peak visions represent divine revelation, supernatural perspectives that provide cosmic understanding unavailable to ordinary earthbound consciousness. The oxygen-depleted environment creates physiological conditions that trigger altered states of consciousness through mechanisms that modern neuroscience recognizes as hypoxia-induced neural activity. Reduced oxygen levels affect brain chemistry in ways that produce euphoria, enhance pattern recognition, create the sensory alterations that spiritual traditions interpret as divine contact. These neurological effects feel supernatural to consciousness, lacking scientific understanding of brain chemistry, providing ancient mountain pilgrims with genuine transcendent experiences that validate beliefs about summit spirituality and divine altitude thresholds. The mystery deepens in archaeological evidence of permanent high-altitude settlements, communities that maintained year-round residence at elevations that challenge human survival. These mountain societies developed sophisticated adaptation techniques, architectural solutions for extreme weather protection, food storage methods for environments where agriculture becomes impossible, social systems that support community survival under conditions of chronic environmental stress. Their elevated lifestyle creates cultural adaptations that merge practical survival skills with spiritual practices designed around permanent residence in divine altitude territory. Mountain spirit mythologies develop elaborate hierarchies that correspond to elevation zones, valley spirits associated with earthbound concerns, mid-altitude beings that govern weather and seasonal phenomena, peak spirits that control cosmic forces and provide access to ultimate divine knowledge. These supernatural geographies reflect sophisticated environmental observation, recognition that mountain ecosystems change dramatically with elevation, that different altitude zones support different biological communities and present distinct survival challenges requiring specialized spiritual relationships. The pilgrimage routes that connect lowland communities with mountain sacred sites create transportation networks that serve both spiritual and economic purposes. Ancient mountain paths demonstrate sophisticated engineering, trail construction that minimizes elevation gain while providing safe passage through difficult terrain. Rest stations positioned at intervals that accommodate human endurance limitations. Route planning that takes advantage of seasonal weather patterns and optimal climbing conditions. These pilgrimage highways become permanent infrastructure that facilitates both religious practice and trade relationships between elevation zones. Medicinal plant knowledge develops around altitude-specific botanical communities that grow only at high elevations. Mountain healers understand that certain therapeutic plants require high-altitude growing conditions. That elevation affects plant chemistry in ways that enhance or modify medicinal properties. That mountain climbing for healing purposes combines physical therapy with botanical medicine harvesting. Modern ethnobotanical research confirms that altitude affects plant secondary metabolite production, validating traditional knowledge about elevation-specific pharmaceutical resources. The seasonal patterns of mountain accessibility create temporal frameworks for spiritual practice that integrate astronomical timing with weather prediction and physiological preparation. Communities recognize that mountain ascent requires optimal weather windows, that seasonal storms make high-altitude travel impossible during certain months, that spiritual pilgrimage must coordinate with environmental conditions that affect survival probability. These seasonal restrictions create natural ceremonial calendars, sacred timing that ensures mountain pilgrimage occurs under conditions that maximize spiritual experience while minimizing physical danger. Mountain death practices develop unique characteristics that reflect beliefs about altitude's relationship to spiritual transition. Communities position burial sites at elevated locations that facilitate deceased spirits' journey toward sky realms. Funeral practices that involve carrying bodies to high-altitude sacred sites despite enormous logistical challenges. Memorial customs that recognize mountain peaks as natural bridges between earthbound existence and divine territories. These elevation-based death rituals demonstrate ancient understanding that altitude provides frameworks for spiritual transition, that mountain ascent serves as metaphor and practical technique for consciousness elevation beyond ordinary earthbound awareness. As seasons cycle through their ancient rhythm around mountain sacred sites, the elevated communities continue their spiritual practices that merge altitude physiology with transcendent experience. The mountain peaks maintain their eternal vigil above surrounding landscape, their snow-covered summits serving as permanent bridges between earthbound human communities and whatever divine territories await beyond the threshold where breathing becomes difficult and ordinary consciousness transforms into something approaching direct divine contact. The sacred mountains continue their patient instruction in elevation spirituality, teaching lessons about transcendence through difficulty, spiritual achievement through physical ordeal. The recognition that divine contact often requires ascending beyond comfortable environmental conditions into territories where survival itself becomes spiritual practice, and altitude creates natural frameworks for understanding consciousness expansion beyond ordinary earthbound limitations. Along the rugged coastlines of ancient Crete, 4,000 years ago, Minoan communities developed their first systematic spiritual relationships with the vast oceanic forces that surround their island civilization. The Mediterranean stretches toward distant horizons that seem to curve beyond the edge of earthbound reality, its depths harboring mysteries that modern marine science measures in miles, but ancient observers interpret as evidence of supernatural realms extending far beneath the waves. Archaeological evidence from Minoan coastal settlements reveals elaborate maritime spiritual practices, underwater ceremonial deposits, ship designs that incorporate religious symbolism. The gradual emergence of ocean mythologies that recognize the sea as a divine being whose moods determine the survival and prosperity of coastal communities. The morning tide rises against ancient breakwaters, each wave carrying the salt essence of vast oceanic territories that extend beyond human geographical knowledge. Modern oceanography reveals the remarkable complexity of tidal systems, the gravitational interactions between Earth, Moon, and Sun that create predictable rise and fall patterns, the coastal dynamics that shape shoreline geography through millennia of wave action. But for early maritime communities, tides represent the ocean's breathing, evidence that the sea possesses life. Consciousness. Rhythmic patterns that connect earthbound waters to cosmic forces governing lunar cycles and seasonal variations. Only took 2,000 years to realize that ocean tides provide humanity's most visceral daily experience of cosmic mechanical forces. The twice-daily demonstration that earthbound waters respond to invisible celestial influences. The fishing boats depart before dawn, their crews offering prayers to ocean spirits whose favor determines whether nets will return full or empty. Contemporary marine biology reveals the sophisticated ecological knowledge that traditional fishing communities develop through generations of oceanic observation, understanding of seasonal fish migration patterns, spawning behaviors. The environmental conditions that concentrate marine life in specific locations during particular times of year. But ancient fishermen interpret these biological patterns as evidence of ocean spirit decisions, supernatural choices about resource distribution that require appropriate ceremonial behavior to influence divine fishing decisions in human favor. The deep waters beyond the continental shelf acquire mythological significance as realms where ocean spirits maintain residence in underwater palaces constructed from coral, pearl, and precious materials that occasionally wash ashore as evidence of submarine divine civilization. Modern deep-sea exploration reveals the genuine wonders that ancient communities could only imagine: bioluminescent creatures, thermal vent ecosystems, abyssal plains that extend for thousands of miles in eternal darkness. These oceanic depths represent territories more alien than outer space, underwater worlds that remain largely unexplored even with contemporary technology, validating ancient intuitions about oceanic mystery and supernatural submarine territories. The storms that sweep across open water create meteorological dramas that demonstrate oceanic power on scales that dwarf human agency. Hurricane-force winds generate wave heights that modern oceanography measures in precise mathematical terms. But ancient maritime observers experience these storm systems as evidence of ocean god anger, supernatural conflicts that manifest as atmospheric violence threatening human survival. The storm waves become liquid mountains, moving terrain that transforms familiar oceanic landscapes into chaotic supernatural battlefields where divine beings wage cosmic wars using water as their primary weapon. The marine creatures that emerge from oceanic depths seem to provide evidence of underwater divine kingdoms populated by supernatural beings whose physical forms reflect their submarine origins. Whales breach the surface with dramatic displays that ancient observers interpret as ocean spirit manifestations. Dolphins demonstrate intelligence and social behaviors that suggest supernatural consciousness. Octopi display problem-solving abilities that seem almost magical to communities lacking understanding of cephalopod neurology. These marine animals become ocean messengers, divine beings that occasionally visit surface waters to communicate with human communities, maintaining appropriate ceremonial relationships with oceanic forces. The mystery deepens in archaeological evidence of deliberate underwater deposits, precious objects thrown into deep water during ceremonies that seem designed to communicate with submarine spiritual realms. These maritime offerings include elaborately crafted weapons, jewelry, ceremonial vessels that represent significant community investment in ocean spirit relationships. Modern underwater archaeology reveals the sophistication of ancient maritime culture, evidence that coastal communities developed complex spiritual practices around oceanic interaction. That sea-based religious activity required specialized knowledge of marine environments and underwater ceremonial techniques. Coastal sacred sites develop architectural features designed to maximize spiritual interaction with oceanic forces. Temples positioned to receive direct wave action during high tides. Altars constructed within tidal pools that flood and drain according to lunar cycles. ceremonial chambers that utilize ocean acoustics to amplify the sound of waves into supernatural communication systems. These maritime temples represent sophisticated integration of architectural design with oceanic dynamics, sacred spaces that transform natural wave patterns into spiritual experiences through careful attention to coastal geography and tidal timing. The seasonal patterns of ocean behavior provide frameworks for understanding cosmic cycles that govern both marine ecosystems and human coastal communities. Summer calms create optimal conditions for deepwater fishing and oceanic exploration. Winter storms demonstrate oceanic power while restricting maritime activities to near-shore environments. Spring tides coincide with marine spawning events that affect food availability and ceremonial timing. These oceanic seasons become evidence of supernatural order, divine scheduling that coordinates marine biological cycles with human survival needs and spiritual practice requirements. Navigation techniques develop around oceanic spiritual practices that merge practical seamanship with religious observance. Traditional navigators learn to read wave patterns, interpret cloud formations that indicate distant land, recognize stellar constellations that provide directional guidance during oceanic voyages. But these practical skills integrate with spiritual practices, prayers for favorable winds, ceremonies for ocean spirit protection, ritual preparations that ensure supernatural support during dangerous oceanic travel. The ocean becomes both a geographical challenge and spiritual ally, requiring technical mastery and appropriate religious relationship for successful maritime activity. Ocean mythology preserves practical knowledge about marine environments within supernatural frameworks that make oceanic information culturally transmissible and socially compelling. Stories about sea monsters encode genuine information about dangerous marine conditions. Tales of underwater kingdoms preserve knowledge about deep-sea geography. Myths about ocean gods contain practical advice about weather prediction and seasonal maritime activity. These oceanic mythologies serve as educational systems, methods for transmitting complex environmental knowledge through narrative frameworks that ensure cultural continuity across generations of coastal communities. The underwater archaeological record reveals evidence of sophisticated maritime engineering that ancient communities developed for oceanic spiritual practice. Artificial reefs created through deliberate stone placement, underwater ceremonial structures that utilize natural submarine geography, harbor modifications that integrated practical marine engineering with spiritual architecture designed for oceanic ritual activity. These submarine constructions demonstrate sophisticated understanding of marine dynamics, tidal flow patterns, wave action effects, the underwater environmental conditions that affect both practical harbor function and ceremonial oceanic interaction. The pearl diving traditions develop elaborate spiritual protocols around descent into oceanic depths that push human physiology beyond normal survival parameters. Modern freediving science reveals the remarkable adaptations that traditional pearl divers achieve: extended breath-holding capabilities, pressure equalization techniques, the physiological changes that allow humans to function temporarily in underwater environments. But ancient diving communities interpret these abilities as spiritual gifts from ocean deities, supernatural protection that allows human consciousness to visit submarine divine territories and return with material proof of underwater spiritual encounters. The tidal pools become natural temples where oceanic forces create temporary ceremonial spaces that appear and disappear according to lunar timing. These intertidal zones support unique biological communities, marine organisms adapted to alternating periods of submersion and aerial exposure, ecosystems that demonstrate life's ability to thrive in boundary conditions between oceanic and terrestrial environments. Ancient coastal communities interpret tidal pool ecology as evidence of divine creativity, supernatural experimentation with life forms that bridge different elemental realms, biological proof of ocean spirits' artistic capabilities and ecological management skills. Maritime funeral practices develop unique characteristics that recognize the ocean's role in spiritual transition between earthbound existence and divine territories. Sea burial becomes ceremonial return of deceased community members to oceanic spiritual realms. Funeral practices that involve releasing bodies to tidal currents that carry the dead toward deep water territories where ocean spirits maintain residence. These maritime death rituals reflect ancient understanding that oceanic waters provide pathways for spiritual journey, that submarine territories serve as afterlife destinations for communities whose survival depends on oceanic resources and maritime activity. The seasonal migration patterns of marine species create spiritual calendars that coordinate human ceremonial activity with oceanic biological cycles. Whale migrations, fish spawning events. Seabird breeding seasons become evidence of supernatural timing that governs both marine ecosystems and human spiritual practice. Coastal communities develop elaborate ceremonies around these biological events, recognition that oceanic creatures follow divine scheduling, that marine animal behavior provides frameworks for understanding cosmic order, that human spiritual activity should coordinate with oceanic biological rhythms that demonstrate supernatural organizational principles. The coral reefs that develop in shallow oceanic waters create underwater landscapes that ancient diving communities interpret as evidence of submarine divine architecture. Modern marine biology reveals the remarkable ecological complexity of coral reef systems, the symbiotic relationships between coral polyps and algae, the biodiversity that rivals terrestrial rainforests, the calcium carbonate construction that creates extensive underwater geological formations. But for ancient maritime cultures, coral reefs represent ocean spirit cities, supernatural urban planning that demonstrates divine engineering capabilities and provides residential areas for underwater spiritual beings. The phosphorescence that appears in oceanic waters during certain conditions creates bioluminescent displays that seem supernatural to observers lacking knowledge of marine microorganism behavior. Disturbed water glows with ethereal light. Shipwakes trail luminous patterns across dark seas. Breaking waves create ghostly illumination that transforms nighttime oceanic environments into magical landscapes. These bioluminescent phenomena become evidence of ocean spirit activity, proof that submarine divine beings possess light-generating abilities. Supernatural confirmation that oceanic depths harbor territories where normal physical laws yield to divine creative forces. The salt harvest traditions that coastal communities develop around oceanic evaporation create spiritual practices that recognize seawater's sacred properties. Solar evaporation of seawater in shallow tidal basins produces crystalline salt deposits that ancient communities interpret as oceanic gifts, divine offerings that demonstrate ocean spirits' generosity toward human survival needs. The salt becomes sacred mineral, oceanic essence concentrated into permanent crystalline form that preserves ocean power for ceremonial and practical use. Salt trade networks extend oceanic spiritual influence into interior territories, spreading maritime religious concepts across continental landscapes through commercial distribution of sacred oceanic materials. As seasons cycle through their ancient rhythm around coastal sacred sites, the oceanic communities continue their maritime spiritual practices that merge practical seamanship with transcendent experience. The vast waters maintain their eternal motion beyond distant horizons, their depths harboring biological mysteries that exceed human imagination, their surface patterns reflecting celestial movements that connect oceanic dynamics to cosmic mechanical forces governing planetary behavior. The ocean continues its patient instruction in depth spirituality, teaching lessons about mystery through immensity, spiritual humility through encounters with forces beyond human scale. The recognition that divine territories extend far beyond earthbound human understanding into submarine realms where darkness, pressure, and alien life forms create environments that challenge every assumption about the nature of existence, consciousness, and the spiritual possibilities that await human exploration of territories beyond ordinary terrestrial experience. The tide retreats toward deeper waters, carrying with it the dissolved minerals, organic materials, and spiritual offerings that coastal communities contribute to oceanic spiritual practice. The waves continue their eternal rhythm against ancient shorelines, each surge carrying messages between submarine divine territories and earthbound human communities that maintain ceremonial relationships with oceanic forces whose power and mystery dwarf human understanding while providing the maritime resources that sustain complex coastal civilizations. Across the ancient kingdoms of Mesopotamia, 4,000 years ago, the shadow of the moon begins its inexorable passage across the face of the sun, plunging the midday world into an unnatural twilight that transforms familiar landscapes into alien territories, where stars appear in daytime skies and nocturnal animals emerge in bewildered confusion. The eclipse unfolds according to celestial mechanics that modern astronomy calculates with mathematical precision, but for early civilizations lacking scientific understanding of orbital dynamics. Solar eclipses represent direct divine intervention in cosmic order, evidence that supernatural forces possess the power to extinguish the sun itself, to transform day into night through divine action that threatens the fundamental conditions supporting human survival. The eclipse begins as a barely perceptible bite taken from the sun's eastern edge, a subtle dimming that careful observers notice as gradual reduction in solar intensity. Contemporary eclipse science reveals the remarkable precision underlying these astronomical events, the orbital mechanics that align Moon, Earth, and Sun with tolerances measured in kilometers, the shadow cone geometry that creates totality paths sweeping across Earth's surface at precise velocities. But ancient communities experience eclipse onset as supernatural attack on solar divinity, cosmic warfare between light and darkness deities, divine conflict whose outcome will determine whether normal daylight returns or eternal night claims dominion over earthbound existence. Only took 2,000 years to realize that eclipse fears appear in every human culture that experiences these astronomical phenomena. Universal recognition that solar extinctions challenge the fundamental assumptions underlying human understanding of cosmic stability and divine order. The partial phase progresses with mounting tension as larger portions of the sun disappear behind the moon's advancing shadow. Animals begin exhibiting behaviors that ancient observers interpret as supernatural sensitivity. Birds return to roosts. Flowers close as if evening approaches. Domestic animals display anxiety that seems to reflect their perception of cosmic disturbance. Modern animal behavior research reveals the physiological basis for these eclipse responses: light level changes that trigger circadian rhythm disruptions, temperature variations that confuse biological timing systems, the environmental cues that prompt creatures to prepare for nightfall during midday hours. The temperature drops perceptibly as solar radiation diminishes, creating meteorological conditions that seem supernatural to communities accustomed to predictable daytime warming cycles. Ancient meteorological knowledge lacks understanding of solar heating mechanisms, atmospheric thermal dynamics, the precise relationship between solar intensity and surface temperature. Eclipse cooling becomes evidence of divine power over earthbound climate conditions. Supernatural ability to manipulate the fundamental forces governing weather patterns and seasonal temperature cycles that determine agricultural productivity and human survival prospects. The shadow bands appear in the final minutes before totality, rippling patterns of light and darkness that race across the ground with snake-like motion that ancient observers interpret as visible manifestation of cosmic serpent spirits. Modern atmospheric science explains shadow bands through precise optical principles, the refraction effects created by atmospheric turbulence, the interference patterns that become visible when solar illumination reduces to crescent shape. But for eclipse witnesses lacking knowledge of atmospheric optics, shadow bands represent direct evidence of supernatural entities emerging during cosmic crisis. Divine serpents, whose movement across earthbound surfaces demonstrates that eclipse events open gateways between normal reality and invisible spiritual realms. The moment of totality arrives with sudden dramatic transformation that ancient communities experience as temporary death of solar divinity. The sun's corona blazes around the moon's silhouette in ghostly illumination that reveals solar atmospheric features invisible under normal circumstances, while bright planets appear in darkened skies alongside stars normally hidden by daylight. This totality environment seems supernatural to observers, lacking understanding of solar atmospheric physics, evidence that sun death reveals hidden cosmic territories, divine realms normally concealed by solar brilliance but temporarily accessible during eclipse conditions. The duration of totality varies according to eclipse geometry, lasting anywhere from seconds to several minutes depending on the observer's location within the shadow path. Ancient communities interpret totality duration as evidence of divine decisions about cosmic conflict resolution. Brief eclipses suggest rapid victory by solar forces. Extended totality periods indicate prolonged supernatural warfare requiring intensive human ceremonial intervention. The eclipse timing becomes supernatural communication, divine messaging through astronomical phenomena that require priestly interpretation and appropriate community response to influence cosmic conflict outcomes. The mystery deepens in historical records of eclipse prediction that ancient astronomers achieved through careful observation of celestial cycles spanning multiple generations. Babylonian astronomical texts demonstrate sophisticated understanding of eclipse periodicity. The recognition that solar and lunar eclipses follow predictable patterns, mathematical relationships that allow future eclipse prediction with remarkable accuracy. These ancient eclipse predictions represent some of humanity's earliest scientific achievements, astronomical knowledge accumulated through systematic observation that reveals underlying mathematical order governing apparently chaotic celestial phenomena. The ritual responses to eclipse events develop elaborate ceremonial frameworks designed to assist solar divinity during cosmic crisis. Communities organize collective prayers, sacrifice offerings, noise-making activities intended to frighten away the supernatural entities attacking solar forces. Archaeological evidence reveals eclipse ritual preparations, ceremonial objects specifically designed for eclipse use, community gathering areas positioned for optimal eclipse viewing, artifact distributions that suggest organized collective response to astronomical emergency situations. These eclipse ceremonies serve both spiritual and psychological purposes, methods for managing community anxiety during genuinely disturbing astronomical events, while providing frameworks for collective action during crisis conditions. The eclipse mythology that develops around these astronomical events preserves both practical knowledge and cultural memory of historical eclipse experiences. Stories about dragons devouring the sun encode genuine information about eclipse periodicity, shadow paths, the timing requirements for eclipse prediction and preparation. Myths about cosmic battles between light and darkness deities contain practical advice about eclipse safety, warnings against direct solar observation, descriptions of corona phenomena, guidance about eclipse duration and recovery timing. These mythological systems serve as educational archives, cultural repositories for eclipse knowledge that ensure community preparedness for future astronomical events. The eclipse paths create geographical patterns that ancient communities interpret as evidence of divine travel routes, supernatural highways across earthbound territories that mark the passage of cosmic conflicts between celestial forces. Modern eclipse cartography reveals the mathematical precision of shadow path geometry, the great circles that eclipse totality follows across Earth's surface. The predictable geographical patterns that repeat according to Saros cycles spanning multiple centuries. But for ancient observers, eclipse paths represent divine territorial claims, supernatural boundaries that mark regions where cosmic battles occurred, sacred landscapes that require ongoing ceremonial attention and spiritual maintenance. The recovery phase following totality creates psychological experiences that ancient communities interpret as evidence of divine resurrection. Supernatural victory by solar forces over cosmic darkness entities. The gradual return of normal daylight seems miraculous to communities convinced they witnessed genuine solar death, proof that appropriate ceremonial intervention successfully influenced cosmic conflict outcomes. This post-eclipse relief generates powerful spiritual experiences, collective recognition of divine providence. Community gratitude for solar restoration. Reinforced beliefs about human ability to influence supernatural forces through appropriate ritual behavior. The eclipse records that ancient civilizations provide modern astronomy with valuable historical data about long-term celestial mechanics. Chinese eclipse observations spanning millennia. Mayan astronomical texts that track eclipse cycles with mathematical precision. European medieval records that document eclipse timing and geographical extent. These historical archives preserve eclipse information across time periods that exceed contemporary observational records. Ancient eclipse documentation represents unintended scientific collaboration across cultures and centuries, accumulated astronomical data that modern eclipse science utilizes for understanding long-term orbital variations and historical celestial mechanics. The eclipse intervals create temporal frameworks that ancient communities use for historical chronology, natural calendar systems based on memorable astronomical events that provide reference points for dating important cultural developments. Eclipse-based dating appears in historical records worldwide, evidence that these dramatic astronomical phenomena serve as natural chronological markers, unforgeable timestamps that anchor historical events within astronomical contexts that modern science can verify and correlate with contemporary calendar systems. The eclipse experiences generate philosophical insights about cosmic order and divine power that influence religious and scientific thinking across multiple civilizations. The recognition that celestial phenomena follow predictable patterns despite their dramatic appearance, that astronomical events demonstrate mathematical relationships underlying apparent chaos, that careful observation reveals hidden order governing cosmic processes. These eclipse-inspired insights contribute to humanity's developing understanding of natural law. Scientific methodology. The possibility that supernatural phenomena might yield to rational analysis and mathematical description. As the moon's shadow races eastward across ancient landscapes at twice the speed of sound, eclipse totality sweeps over successive communities that experience momentary cosmic crisis followed by gradual solar restoration. The eclipse leaves behind transformed human understanding, enhanced recognition of cosmic forces beyond human control, renewed appreciation for the mathematical precision underlying celestial phenomena, deepened awareness that astronomical events provide windows into cosmic processes that exceed earthbound experience while following natural laws that patient observation can eventually decode and predict. The sun emerges from behind the moon's shadow with renewed brilliance, its familiar presence restored to earthbound communities whose eclipse experience has reinforced fundamental spiritual understanding. The recognition that cosmic forces possess power beyond human agency. That celestial phenomena demonstrate divine involvement in earthbound affairs. That astronomical events provide direct evidence of supernatural territories that intersect with normal reality during rare moments when cosmic mechanics align to reveal hidden dimensions of existence normally concealed by ordinary daylight conditions. In the quiet laboratories of contemporary neuroscience research centers, 21st century scientists peer through advanced brain imaging technology at neural activity patterns that would seem familiar to ancient shamans, medieval mystics, and traditional spiritual practitioners across every human culture. The fMRI scanners reveal the remarkable consistency of consciousness-altering experiences, specific brain networks that activate during meditation, prayer, ritual participation, the neurological territories that modern research recognizes as the biological basis for humanity's universal spiritual experiences. These scientific discoveries validate what indigenous wisdom traditions have maintained across millennia, that human consciousness possesses innate capacities for transcendent experience. That spiritual practice activates genuine neurological processes, that the sacred experiences reported across cultures reflect authentic biological phenomena rather than mere cultural construction or psychological delusion. The default mode network quiets during profound spiritual experience, its normally constant activity diminishing in ways that contemporary consciousness research associates with ego dissolution, transcendent awareness. The sense of unity that mystics have described across every religious tradition. Modern neuroscience reveals this network's role in maintaining the sense of separate self, the narrative identity that ordinary consciousness constructs through continuous internal dialogue and autobiographical memory. When spiritual practices successfully quiet default mode activity, practitioners report experiences remarkably similar to those described in ancient texts: the dissolution of subject-object boundaries, direct awareness of interconnection, consciousness, expansion beyond ordinary identity limitations. The archaeological evidence reveals humanity's consistent spiritual impulses across every cultural development, from Paleolithic cave paintings to contemporary meditation research, from ancient astronomical monuments to modern psychedelic therapy studies. This remarkable continuity suggests that spiritual seeking represents fundamental human neurology rather than cultural accident. That consciousness itself possesses inherent capacities for transcendent experience that manifest across different historical periods through whatever conceptual frameworks and technological possibilities each era provides. Only took 40,000 years to realize that scientific investigation of consciousness eventually arrives at insights that spiritual traditions have preserved through direct experiential methods spanning millennia of human cultural development. The neural correlates of spiritual experience demonstrate specific activation patterns that appear consistently across different religious traditions. Meditation techniques and consciousness-altering practices. Brain regions associated with attention regulation show enhanced activity during contemplative practices, while areas involved in spatial temporal processing exhibits decreased function during profound spiritual states. These neurological findings validate experiential reports from Buddhist meditators, Christian contemplatives, Islamic Sufis, indigenous shamans, evidence that diverse spiritual practices activate similar brain networks through different cultural approaches to the same underlying neurological capacities. The evolutionary origins of spiritual experience reveal themselves through comparative neurobiology that examines consciousness-related brain structures across mammalian species. Humans possess elaborated versions of neural systems that other mammals use for social bonding, environmental awareness, the integration of sensory information into coherent experience. This evolutionary perspective suggests that spiritual capacities emerge from survival-related neurological functions, the enhanced pattern recognition that aided environmental navigation, the social bonding mechanisms that supported cooperative behavior, the consciousness expansion that provided adaptive advantages in complex social and ecological environments. The psychedelic research renaissance of recent decades validates traditional plant medicine knowledge through rigorous scientific methodology that confirms therapeutic applications indigenous communities have utilized for millennia. Controlled clinical studies demonstrate that compounds like psilocybin, DMT, and mescaline produce profound spiritual experiences while showing remarkable therapeutic efficacy for treatment-resistant depression, anxiety disorders, addiction patterns that conventional medical approaches fail to address effectively. These research findings bridge ancient plant wisdom with contemporary neuropharmacology, demonstrating that traditional spiritual technologies possess genuine medical applications that modern science can verify and optimize through careful research protocols. The meditation research reveals measurable changes in brain structure and function that develop through sustained contemplative practice. Long-term meditators show increased gray matter density in attention-related brain regions, enhanced connectivity between areas associated with emotional regulation and cognitive control, neuroplasticity changes that demonstrate the brain's capacity for positive transformation through spiritual practice. These scientific findings confirm what contemplative traditions have maintained, that sustained spiritual practice produces genuine biological changes, that consciousness can be systematically trained and developed, that meditation represents practical technology for enhancing mental health and cognitive function. The mystery deepens in consciousness studies that investigate the relationship between subjective spiritual experience and objective neurological measurement. Advanced brain imaging can track the neural correlates of contemplative states, but the qualitative content of spiritual experience, its meaning, significance, transformative impact on individual worldview and behavior remains beyond direct scientific measurement. This explanatory gap between objective brain activity and subjective conscious experience represents one of science's most profound unsolved problems, the hard problem of consciousness that continues to challenge materialist assumptions about the relationship between mind and brain. The cross-cultural research reveals universal patterns in spiritual experience that appear independent of specific religious beliefs or cultural conditioning. Studies of near-death experiences, mystical encounters, meditation insights report remarkably similar phenomenological features across diverse cultural backgrounds. The sense of unity, transcendent love, ineffable knowledge, life-transforming significance that characterizes profound spiritual experience regardless of the conceptual framework participants use for interpretation. This universal core suggests that spiritual experience reflects genuine features of human consciousness rather than culturally constructed expectations or religious programming. The therapeutic applications of spiritual practices gain increasing recognition within conventional medical and psychological treatment approaches. Mindfulness-based interventions demonstrate clinical efficacy for treating anxiety, depression, chronic pain, addiction disorders through mechanisms that integrate spiritual practice with evidence-based therapeutic techniques. Contemplative approaches to end-of-life care help terminal patients process death anxiety while finding meaning and peace during dying transitions. These clinical applications demonstrate that spiritual practices possess genuine healing properties that complement conventional medical treatments while addressing dimensions of human experience that purely technological approaches often neglect. The network neuroscience research reveals how spiritual practices affect brain connectivity patterns in ways that enhance psychological resilience. Emotional regulation, cognitive flexibility. Meditation training strengthens connections between prefrontal control networks and emotional processing centers, creating the neural basis for equanimity that contemplative traditions have cultivated through systematic mental training. Prayer and ritual participation activate social bonding networks that reduce isolation while enhancing sense of community belonging. These connectivity changes explain how spiritual practices produce measurable improvements in mental health and life satisfaction. The developmental research investigates how spiritual experiences affect human psychological maturation across the lifespan. Children who participate in religious communities show enhanced pro-social behavior, ethical reasoning, resilience during difficult life circumstances. Adolescents who develop contemplative practices demonstrate reduced risk-taking behavior, improved emotional regulation, stronger sense of purpose and meaning, Adults who maintain spiritual practices report higher life satisfaction, better physical health, more successful aging processes that integrate wisdom with acceptance of mortality. The integration challenges facing contemporary culture involve developing frameworks that honor both scientific rigor and spiritual wisdom without reducing either domain to the other. Traditional spiritual practices offer time-tested technologies for consciousness development that modern life often neglects, while scientific methodology provides validation and optimization techniques that can enhance traditional approaches. This integration requires intellectual humility from both scientific and spiritual communities, recognition that each domain possesses valuable insights while maintaining limitations that complementary approaches can address. The future directions for consciousness research include investigating the mechanisms through which spiritual practices produce therapeutic benefits, understanding the relationship between subjective experience and objective brain measurements, developing technologies that can enhance or support traditional contemplative approaches without replacing the experiential foundation that spiritual development requires. These research programs offer possibilities for advancing human understanding of consciousness while preserving the wisdom traditions that have guided spiritual development across human history. As contemporary science continues investigating the biological basis of spiritual experience, the ancient practices maintain their patient effectiveness for individuals seeking meaning. Transcendence. Connection to something larger than ordinary identity concerns. The laboratory measurements validate what traditional practitioners have always known through direct experience, that consciousness possesses capacities for transformation and transcendence that represent humanity's most valuable inheritance. Neurological gifts that connect individual awareness to cosmic processes that extend far beyond the boundaries of separate selfhood while remaining grounded in the biological reality of human embodied existence. The spiral of scientific discovery curves back toward ancient wisdom, revealing through technological investigation what spiritual traditions have preserved through experiential transmission. The sacred and the scientific converge in recognition of consciousness as the fundamental mystery that gives rise to both subjective spiritual experience and objective scientific inquiry. The unified field from which both domains emerge as complementary approaches to understanding the remarkable nature of human awareness and its place within the vast cosmos that supports, contains, and expresses itself through conscious experience. The ancient pathways of wonder wind down now through evening shadows that have gathered stories across 40,000 years of human spiritual seeking. From the first fires that flickered in African darkness to the laboratory instruments that measure the neural correlates of transcendence, consciousness has pursued its own understanding through every available means: cave paintings and stone circles, plant medicines and mountain peaks, ocean depths and eclipse shadows, ancestral voices and contemporary scientific investigation. Each tradition has contributed its piece to humanity's vast spiritual archive. The shamanic practices that recognized consciousness expansion as healing technology, the astronomical observations that connected earthbound ceremonies to cosmic mechanical precision, the forest wisdom that understood ecological relationships as spiritual communion, the death practices that transformed individual mortality into community transcendence, the migration of spiritual insight across cultures, landscapes, historical periods, technological developments that preserved essential wisdom while adapting to changing circumstances, the mysteries remain. Patient and inexhaustible. The relationship between subjective spiritual experience and objective neurological measurement, the connection between individual consciousness and cosmic processes that exceed human comprehension, the ancient practices that continue producing transformation in contemporary lives through mechanisms that blend biological science with something that seems to transcend purely material explanation. The laboratory scanners detect the same brain patterns that once flickered in firelight consciousness. The neural networks that connected early humans to experiences beyond ordinary awareness. The sacred sites continue their patient instruction across millennia, stone circles tracking astronomical cycles, forest groves teaching ecological wisdom, mountain peaks offering altitude perspectives that transform earthbound consciousness through rarefied atmospheric chemistry and expanded geographical vision. Modern students of consciousness rediscover through careful scientific investigation what traditional practitioners have always known through direct experiential engagement, that awareness possesses capacities for expansion, connection, transformation that represent human neurology's most sophisticated achievement. The practices continue, the mysteries deepen. The consciousness that began asking questions around ancient hearths continues its patient inquiry through whatever means each generation provides for exploring the nature of awareness. Transcendence, the remarkable capacity of human consciousness to investigate itself while remaining forever beyond complete understanding. The shadows lengthen toward night, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who have pursued the sacred through available means. Empirical investigation and visionary experience, scientific measurement and contemplative practice, technological development and traditional transmission. The consciousness that animates this inquiry settles into the quiet recognition that the journey continues, that each generation contributes its discoveries to humanity's ongoing exploration of the mystery that gives rise to both scientific curiosity and spiritual longing. Both laboratory research and contemplative insight, both technological measurement and transcendent experience. The ancient stories merge with contemporary discoveries in the understanding that consciousness investigating itself through any available means participates in the cosmic processes that created the conditions for awareness. Inquiry. The remarkable capacity of human neurology to question its own nature while remaining grounded in biological reality that connects individual awareness to planetary, solar, galactic processes extending beyond human comprehension into territories where scientific measurement and spiritual experience converge in recognition of mystery that transcends both domains while embracing them both within its vast, patient, inexhaustible embrace. Sleep well. The consciousness that dreams is the consciousness that investigates, that transcends, that connects all seeking across time into the unified field of awareness, exploring itself through every possible means.